welcome. Namaste. Dear Howard, I see you in there. Ogre Tilly, see you in there. Sending your big love, big blessings. Hope you guys are having an absolutely fantastic day. Sorry if I look like I'm got the ghost thing going on. It's not intentional. Oh, I know why I look ghost-like. Duh. There's no background light on. The contrast is too much. But yeah, we've got a cool little show on today. I would stand up and turn on the light, but I'll have to turn off my camera to do that for obvious reasons. So how are you guys doing in the chat? So far, Cosmic and myself are here. You all know Cosmic. He doesn't need much of an introduction, but we'll do one anyway for the new people that are arriving and catching on later. Cosmic is a modern-day John Dee without a crystal ball. He doesn't need a crystal ball, but he's not beyond using a crystal ball if he feels like using a crystal ball. Is that correct, Cosmic?
You know what? I've kind of realized what it actually is that the world becomes the crystal ball, and it's more about, because like the thing about this whole fairy magic thing that I've been learning from them recently is it's all about accessing the world outside of your vision. It's like there's an extra dimensional space you got to like tap into. And so really it's almost like in a lot of ways you're sort of like learning to look at the edges of reality. So it's like scrying, but it's like instead of looking at the crystal ball, you're looking at everything outside of the crystal ball. So it's almost like an inverted, it's like inverted scrying now that I think about it. That's a good way to put it. But yeah, and I've been working with the Fae for about 5 or 6 years now, like full on, and they've been basically teaching me about how the entire outer universes work, and basically told me that everything I know is totally wrong. So it's been an interesting journey. All right, let's get rolling.
Well, it's always good to realize that everything we know is wrong, because it just means we start from scratch. And when we start from scratch, we are renewing, refreshing. That's true knowledge. Everything else is just belief. Crystals that stick to us like dust on a long journey. You get back from a long journey, you got dust in your ears, in your nose, in your eyes. It depends on how long the journey is. But like if it's a significantly long journey, and you're like, especially in India, gosh, I used to have to clean the stuff out of my eyes and my ears and my nose every time. If I got on the bike and I was on the bike for more than an hour, my ears and my nose was just clogged up. Or walking, walk through town would do it. So yeah, a big welcome to everybody. Om Namah Shivaya. We've got a cool little discussion lined up today. That wasn't supposed to happen. That's the background. Okay, cool. So what do we got on? We have, and I notice here we've got 7 of you in one live, and we've got 10 of you on the mobile phone live. So everybody check it out. The mobile phone live, because there's 2 lives, 2 separate lives. So check it out. There's 2 different groups of you, different groups commenting. If you can't see the comments here by Out Tuition, let me put them on the screen. That's a good idea. Duh. If I put them on the screen, then it doesn't matter which live you're in. You can see them on the screen, right? I think that's the option. I usually do. I just sometimes forget. So, yeah, without any further ado, let me also introduce dear Indy Sage before I introduce the topic. Indy Sage, as you know, works with shadow work very much intently, devoted to a broad number of fields. He's very much a researcher into his anthropology on the one hand. On the other hand, he's very into his Taoism, very much attracted and embedded within the shamanic. And also, he's also dancing on the tune of Hermetics. So he's like a multicultural, multi-dimensional thinker, you could say, with his fingers in a whole lot of pots. Namaste. Welcome to dear Indy Sage. Just as with Cosmic, it's an honor to have you. Give us a few words of intro, brother.
So glad to be here. Thanks for the great introduction. You got it all in a nutshell there to this morning, sir. I know you're sharp as a whistle. And it's going to be a great discussion. I'm looking forward to a wonderful talk again. And as Franklin mentioned, I started off with Taoism in the year 2000 in my deeper journeys towards finding resonant material of mysticism that lines up with my path. And I've been on the middle path ever since. And shadow work came to me after I graduated with my undergrad in psychology, and I had a near-death experience, and it helped me transform myself. The shamanism thing for me has gone back further than anything, back to my childhood when I was just out in the wilderness, communing with nature, and doing a little interspecies communication with the animals, and learning about the spirit animals and their messages to us. And Hermeticism is something that's always been dear to me. I've always gravitated towards Egyptology, and over the years I got more deeply versed with the Cometian lore and mythos, and then later Mesopotamian stuff as well. So I'm always learning more stuff. I'm always checking out new anthropological findings, tracing us further back in time to our ancestry. And I'm all about uncovering the lost herstory that's been covered up by our history of the fallen patriarchy. So glad to be here, guys, and let's get things cracking.
Well, there we go. Big love, dear brother. And namaste, Puta Cabra. How you doing? Big love. You're doing the charlatan dance. Sweet, man. There is no Egypt. It's called Kemet. Yeah. But when we speak about Kemet in modern day times, we're speaking about the physical location that is today called Egypt. Although you're right, Kemet was much bigger than our current Egypt. It was a global empire. It was not a tiny little chunk of Northern Africa. It ran all the way to South Africa, right up into Turkey, I believe. And so my research shows me Kemet was big. But anyway, when we speak of Egypt, just so that everybody who comes can understand the physical location of the space we're talking about. But you are right, effectively. Welcome, dear Howard, dear Otigali, dear everybody else that's come to arrive and dance the dance with all of us, sending you all big love and big blessings. Hope you guys are smiling, jiving, and doing much better than just merely surviving. Now, we've got two different chats here. Howard's in the other chat. And welcome to all of you guys. So, yeah, the topic at hand is looking like a good one. Did you want to say something about Egypt or
Yeah,
Kemet?
I just want to make a couple of notes about Egypt. The name Egypt actually comes from the Greek name for Memphis, Hygiptos, which is where our current name for Egypt comes. And there was the Hellenistic period, so Egypt was very much its own thing for a long time until the Greeks kind of came in and changed things all up. Interestingly, they kind of originally had Jehudi in Kemet, and then Thoth was like a later name for Jehudi, and I guess the Egyptian Empire, and then we have Hermes replacing him in the Hellenistic period. And they both were scribe gods of wisdom, but interestingly, they had different representations of animals. We had Thoth and Jehudi being represented by the baboon and the ibis. The ibis because it has a crescent moon-shaped beak, and Thoth is a moon god. And the baboon because Thoth is wise, and baboons are wise and have good dexterity. Also, with when we have Hermes coming in, Hermes Trismegistus, the messenger of the gods, it was a messenger in Mount Olympus, whereas Hermes was the messenger of the underworld, and or Thoth rather, and his representation, Hermes' representation, was the hare and the cockerel and the tortoise. The cockerel just being another older name for the rooster. So they have very different animals, although there was a bird in both of them, the representations, but they do very much encapsulate the Hermetic canon. So their writings were very paralleled with each other and had a lot of synchronicities as well. I feel like Enoch had a similar themes and topics as well. So it's kind of, to me, part of the extended Hermetic canon.
Discussion today. I think it's going to be quite a lot of fun. Obviously, esoteric language of sacred geometry, especially as it relates to sigil magic, and sigil also being the source of where language is really essentially coming from. So this is applying to obviously all different forms of occult practice, what is called magic, witchcraft, sorcery. Yeah, gray areas between all of them. Some differences of practice, but some witches call themselves magicians, and some magicians call themselves witches, and sorcerers call themselves whatever they feel like calling themselves. So, these are all terms that are probably not also very clearly delineated or
And you got your
delineated by many people. But regardless, we're going to be taking a deep dive into this. We're going to be looking at the protection. Why is the Saturn cube so protective? What is the elements of the Saturn cube? The Merkaba and the human energy field, how this relates, what the geometry and shape forms of the etheric is within this field of energy, the etheric structures of form and how number and shape are all imprinting upon this field of geometry, the shape of harmonic frequencies, and the form and the shape of thought. Very important. Thought forms. We think of thoughts as being little things that like rummage through our heads, but we forget that they have a shape, they have a form. You can see them on the etheric and the astral planes if you observe them. And then obviously the occult nature of consciousness. We're going to be delving into this, the secret hidden aspects of our mind, which is what I was just talking about now. Glimpses we can get when we're outside of the body of the nature of perspective and shifting elements of thought as we see them in terms of substantiality. We're also going to be taking a look at form and time, considering it as, dynamic expressions of space, just exactly what space is, what they call akasha, how these mental shapes or forms, thought forms, affect our moods and central nervous system as well. Of course, the general state of mind that is produced by these effects, the causal effects of these different imprints throughout our consciousness field. So this is going to be sort of a theme that's going to be running through the conversation, hopefully, if we can keep it on track. And then obviously the etheric structure that's tethering the astral qualities, how the structures form, how the physical body is a reflection of all of this, is something that comes up often. But we're going to be looking at this especially with regards to the sigils and with regards to the forms used within magic to charge energy, and how to capture that energy and how to utilize that energy, and why we use certain kinds of sigil forms, and what exactly it is that makes Saturn sigil probably one of the most important sigils of all sigils. And why it's used for protection, because it is one of the master sigils. Let's not even forget about it. It seals time. Let's just think about what that means. It seals time, it seals space, it seals dimension. So yeah, we're going to be looking at the hyperdimensional quantum field, right? And also like looking at these core principles as they relate to the mystic arts and the practice. So yeah, come and be a part of this. We're going to be unraveling these esoteric occult elements of spirituality, and I'm going to throw in some perspective of shamanic lore as well. Since I am a shaman, I should be throwing this in. So welcome everybody that's in the chat. Welcome everybody that's sitting on the table. Anybody want to kick the ball to get the ball rolling? Let me know.
Yeah, let's kick it off. I feel like, to me, Saturn could be interpreted as, and it is associated with the owl and the snake and possibly the crow as well. But Saturn is associated with being Father Time, also known as Kronos. And I feel like there's a transformation that's part of Saturn that can be imbued by like the snake's second skin, but it's not like your usual like second skin of like spiritual rebirth. I feel like with Saturn, we have a different kind of transformation from childhood into the ego, into the slave mind, where you go in from being in innocence into taking on the social contract and then becoming a servant to your community and your society and having that role as your occupation. I feel like there's that kind of a transformation that's part of Saturn. And that's kind of encapsulates the idea of like father time and the loss of innocence and the devouring of children, because some people interpret it darkly, the idea of the devouring of children, which ties back to the story of how Kronos devoured his children to prevent them from superseding him, from taking him out of the picture to take his throne, much like he did to his father. So he was trying to prevent that, although Zeus was able to overcome him, Zeus being a representation also of Jupiter, a larger gas giant that overcame him and helped save his siblings and got them taken out from his gut by tricking him and giving him a stone to eat instead of himself, and then I think poisoning him so that he would then regurgitate his children. They were then brought back to the world thanks to Zeus. But I feel like that the devouring of children also refers to the idea that when a child reaches a certain age, they're no longer allowed to be a child of innocence. They then have to take on serious roles of society. So I just wanted to pose that to you guys. Do you think that the snake could represent that kind of a transformation of its second skin? Not for the betterment of the soul, but for the betterment of the society, kind of for integration's sake, that people can become integrated and conform to a society that works cohesively together. But I also like to touch on the fact that the Saturn sigil is also the same as the Bagawa square created by Fusi, the Green Emperor, that was used to create the 8 trigrams, using all of the 8 symbols on the outside of the square and leaving the number 5 out as the root or the source, transformative principle.
Yeah, I think there's no coincidence there at all. We can't even try to imagine that to be a coincidence, because it just blatantly is what it is, right? And yeah, we can get a looksy booksy at the Saturn square. The first thing we notice about the Saturn square when we look at it, I pointed this out before, it is essentially an enneagram. It's a different way of presenting an enneagram. And it's an enneagram that becomes, well, a square of 9. And it's the 3 by 3. 3 lines of 3. Namaste, D love. How are you? Hope you're good. Toby One Kenobi, big love, dear brother. Hope you're doing well. Yeah. So looking at this the square here within the triangle, within the circle. I didn't mention the alchemy, but essentially Saturn is like a major part of the alchemy, essentially, if we really look at it. And there's another sort of a silent ood to be considered here, because if we think of if we go into alchemy for a moment, okay, and we imagine the 3 elements in alchemy that's fundamentally the elements of alchemy, we could say that in alchemy, salt is representing the physical body, and the element of salt is essentially that crystallization principle, and that crystallization principle is really very close to the heart of Saturn. So we could draw an association with Saturn and the element of salt. And salt is also a highly purifying agent. So this sort of gives us a hint to why one of the reasons why the Saturn square is so fundamental for psychic and spiritual protection, because to this day, if people have an entity in the homes, the layman, do you know what they do? And I mean, this is basically this is natural magic that anybody can do. Get a kilogram of salt and sprinkled a kilogram of salt all around your room. And with the intention of the salt, you could say a prayer, you could create a poem or an invocation, and imagine that salt pulling in all of the negativity into itself, contracting it within itself. And then one would move that salt to the corners of the room, and one would let the salt sit there and accumulate all of that negative potential into the salt, and then draw it away from the corners into the center of the room like a spiral movement, and then sweep it up and remove it, and then continue with whatever else you're doing to cleanse the space. And this is sort of like a layman's natural magic approach to purifying a space. It's a good way to clean your home, actually, effectively. If there's bacteria in your home and you were to do that with salt on the floor, it's pretty much going to capture all of the bacteria and bits and pieces into it. So, Saturn and salt have got this very powerful potential towards purification, because Saturn contracts towards its core. And so the principle of contraction towards the core, even though it's highly mystical and challenging, happens to be that very important point that we need to go through. Whether we're speaking of it in terms of rite of passage or ritual or initiation, it's the same thing essentially. So yeah, Saturn holds a lot of cards in the occult field, very, very important, fundamental, should we say, as much of the inner work that we will do when we're training involves concentration, and concentration is essentially the substance that produces the fruits of contemplation, and the concentration is a contraction towards minimalism, and that minimalism can be seen as purification, which is also moving away from the diversity back towards the singularity principle. And the closer we get to the singularity principle, the more abundance are the potentials of energy and motion and change. So Saturn does hold these incredible keys, and it's something that a lot of these young YouTuber, TikTokers, whatnotters that are like new to this stuff, when I say new, I mean 10 years, newbies. Most of the people doing videos about this are noobs, basically. They've got under a decade or a decade's experience. It's like then you're becoming a beginner essentially, and so you'll find that a lot of these people are pushing these narratives about Saturn being like related to this evil thing, and it's this evil cult of Saturn, and that's all that Saturn is. No, there's a reason why these evil cults have used Saturn. And I thought to put this onto the table, like, why do you think all of these dark cults have been so drawn to using Saturn's potential and power? What do you guys think?
Well, I think from an occult perspective, I always thought of Saturn as kind of being like the source code of the universe, because if Saturn, represents like the limitations and the sort of the more, confined aspects of reality, if you can take control of that, you basically have control of everything. So it makes sense why those elite types would be interested in Saturn from that perspective.
Exactly. And also, I mean, the fact that it represents contraction. So if you want to make a contract, right, that's going to be your key. Your key to making any contract is going to most definitely be like aligning with the principles and the energies of Saturn, because that is essentially what we're talking about when we're talking about contracts, right? And I think people forget that. Yeah, they think about contraction and they think about contracts and they go like, oh, that's all good and well, but they don't really fully recognize exactly what that represents, just how that works. And here we have the Saturn sigil and the Saturn square, and we can get a bit of a look at how this represents. Can you see that this is a contract? This picture, yeah, if you look at it carefully, you see the green and the orange and the blue. The blue represents the law, right? And there's the giving and the receiving, which is what the contract is all about, right? Contracts usually involve you give this and then you'll receive this. I receive this and I give this. So two people are bound by what is being received and what is being given. So the very idea of giving and receiving is Saturn in element. And this is really important to understand, because when we look at Saturnella, the great holiday that became Christmas, right? Let's not pretend that Christmas isn't just a hyped up revamp of an ancient holiday. Pagan, of course. Big up and big love to all the pagans out there. You guys kept it alive. But yeah, the Saturnella is essentially about giving gifts. And we haven't forgotten that, because on Christmas we give gifts, right? It's become a bit of a shopping madness, craziness. They had to invent Black Friday just to make sure that that people would be ready for, for those crazy holidays, and get people in the spirit of the holiday. Go and have a fight in a shop about who got there first. But yeah, I think like there's definitely an element to be understood about the potentials of giving and receiving, though in my experience Saturn has a lot more to do with building. So it's also about the receiving, the building, and then the giving. Does that make sense to you guys? In terms of, if you look at this picture, does it show you that?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, the structure in the middle, it kind of looks like two teepees. It also could be interpreted as two A's that are facing each other, butt to butt. And then we have also like the Merkaba is involved in there as well, spirit vessel. If you connect the lines of the V's at the end, make them triangles. And so there's a lot there. I feel like it also kind of encapsulates the Metatron cube as well, somewhat. So there's so much structure there, and the association with contracts and structure, it kind of leads towards architecture and other contracts as well of the institutions of society and things of the sort. So yeah, I definitely vibe with that.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting that you mentioned Metatron there, because I think that's quite an important perspective to hold. Yeah, and from the mystic traditions, right? Metatron is basically considered to be dual in nature, right? So there's this powerful relation with Metatron as being above and below the firmament, and Metatron is the celestial scribe, right? Now, Metatron's cube is obviously the cube that Saturn holds, right? Saturn is looking after the cube of Metatron, because Metatron is scribing all the fundamental knowledge, right? And so there's an interesting association that is possibly often overlooked here between the idea of Metatron and Saturn's cube. And I would also urge people to start to consider for a moment, like specifically just exactly how their schooling system works, and how the schooling system, what they can remember of the schooling that was done to them, and to take a look at that. Because speaking of dual nature and having things having a two-face or a two-side nature, this is, I think, an issue that many parents have discovered, right? Like if you've got your children in school and you go to school out of time, you're often, I've been told, they were surprised at what they saw. They weren't expecting that, because they had been given a slightly different perspective or a different idea. And the whole idea of schooling, now we're talking about Pisces. We're talking about the opposite, right? We're talking about Jupiter. We're talking about everybody being schooled into to expand into the same proverbial box. And Genghis Khan, cosmics, yang and yang, just yang all the way. We're just going to yang it up. So who we got in the room here? We got Mark Vincent. Big love, big blessings to you. Hope you're well. Saturn is symbolic of our brain. It's the duality of yin and yang. Aha, yin and yang. Okay, fair enough. Naturally, I think Saturn is so universal. It fits into all of these boxes. Yeah. And then it fits into the boxes that we haven't mentioned as well, because this is the nature of Saturn, right? Saturn is such a powerful image that we struggle. We struggle to break it down and put it into its own little lane, because it literally is going to be more than what we asked for. But that being said, I think as well what we can also deduce when we look at the Saturn square, and this is something that's quite obvious to look at, is the principle of centripetal and centrifugal forces, which is, if we look at it, we could think of the life-giving principle and the principle of entropy. So anentropy and entropy, if you will, that which is building structures and that which is breaking structures down. And so it represents that cosmic balance in the universe, which we can only see in the number 8. And the number 8 is one of those really interesting numbers, because it relates to sustenance on some level as well, right? Because obviously what we ate is what made up the structure of our bodies. So we do need to make sure that we had eaten well, and that we are able to process deeper and more profound ideas. And this is something that's being taken from us in this modern age. I think it's just a big problem. What do you guys think about the idea of our Saturn potential being diminished? Like, we talk about humanity being dumbed down, but Saturn represents the ability to structure thoughts, right? To structure the imagination. So the imagination is a very wild instrument. When Saturn structures the imagination, so it's very prominent in the process of manifestation. So what do you think when it comes to the psyops that we're watching and observing? What do you think the effects are specifically on the Saturn element, the Saturnian potential archetypes within our consciousness, if we consider them as living beings?
I feel like the issues with Saturn kind of arise where mostly people that step into rabbit holes, that step into deeper truths that are not available on the surface of the mainstream, start to realize that a lot of people are stuck in these delusionary worlds, and it's hard for them to see beyond the veil and the facade that's put in front of them. So for a lot of people that have been able to see beyond it, this is very blatantly obvious. But for most people, they live within this veil, and they just mostly focused on what is shown to them, and they don't really feel like there's a necessity to dig any deeper. They feel like, oh, things have been presented to us in such a way that if we just kind of go along with it, we can fit in better with other people. We don't have to step on other people's worldviews and trample their ideas of like what the world consists of. We can just kind of go along with them. Whereas other people want to question things more. It's like, wait, but this doesn't seem right. Like, what about this? And what about that? And so I think even in science, you see a lot of this ignorance where people claim to be scientific and be willing to understand things tentatively and constantly learn. But at the same time, a lot of people get stuck on these peer-reviewed studies, and they'll say, oh, if there's no peer-reviewed study, then it must be false, which I think you really need to start to question a lot of these peer-reviewed studies. People with a lot of money, mostly millionaires, are the ones that do these. And I think there's a lot of bias involved in trying to set these up, where they're trying to establish a certain narrative and they get other people along with them on board. It doesn't necessarily mean that the peer-reviewed studies are the utmost way to examine the truth or discern truth. I think, to me, there could be an aspect of truth in them where they're rigorously tested and with their hypothesis amongst various studies, and they try to see if they can be replicated. There's some value to that, but at the same time, you sometimes have to question what are their motives? What is really being done here? Is this really something that we want to know to be a truth, or is this something that would be more convenient for them to have us know to be a truth? So it's good to keep an open eye about these things and use discernment.
I think when it comes to how Saturn is affecting the imagination, particularly entertainment, I was just kind of thinking about this now, about how a lot of modern media is sort of meant to like reflect modern times. Like I noticed there's like this kind of this tendency that like, Lord of the Rings and all these other fantasy novels, like the politically correct thing to do is it has to sort of reflect, the modern world and the mundane world. And that's something I've noticed with a lot of media is that a lot of fantasy doesn't seem fantastical anymore. Like there's this element of like they're trying to make it more mundane, trying to take that element of wonder out of it. See, to me, I always feel that good fantasy has like this element of psychedelia to it. And I feel like that aspect, that surreal psychedelic element is sort of diminishing. So to me, if you think about it from this way, it's almost like the mundaneness and the rules of Saturn are essentially kind of overreaching their boundaries of physical reality, and sort of like it's reaching its authoritarian rule within the realm of the imagination as well. Because if you think about, it's like Saturn has sort of jurisdiction over kind of the physical world and the cosmos, but you know once you go beyond Saturn, it doesn't really like have any jurisdiction anymore because it's like you're basically outside the physical realm. And so to me, the Saturnian magic is to sort of how do we extend Saturn beyond this realm? How do we, take the astral plane and essentially sort of strip it away of its essence? It's like literally like the never ending story about how the world of Fantastica is basically just kind of getting swallowed up by the nothing, and all the fantasies and everything is starting to become less real. And I kind of actually am starting to notice that, within a lot of our media and books and films and video games, is that there is sort of this lack of like, just like a sense of wonder and imagination in them. It's always about, instead of like, oh, here's a cool idea that I think is really interesting, it's about, what is this like political message that we can say, or what is this thing we can do to sell this particular product? So if anything, I think the influence of Saturn is I don't know, what is the right word for like to turn something mundane, the mediocratization of the imagination. That's what Saturn is doing.
I like that notion, and I think it's very on point. I think it's very relevant. And let me know if there's any issues with my audio. There shouldn't be. Am I okay, guys?
Yeah, you sound fine.
Good. Yeah, so I think that's like a very excellent point, that mediocrity. And I think you're completely right, because we can even see how much of our Saturn symbolism is being pushed at us, right, in a lot of these films. And I agree, because Saturn is all about realism, isn't it? When you think about what Saturn represents, you think about Capricorn. Capricorn doesn't have time for daydreams. They don't have time for playing around. They don't have time for fooling around. Capricorn, they want to get to work. They've got a mission, man. They've got to build an empire. You think of Genghis Khan, you think of these characters, you think of like proper Capricornian blokes that were out there and they had a mission, and they were the guys who woke up at 4:00 in the morning to start planning their day, so that by 5 a.m. they're working, getting on with the day, and by the time the day's done, they're the last ones to pack up. That's a Capricornian element for you. And I think that they've turned our entertainment into work. And I hope you guys can follow where I'm coming from here when I say they've turned our entertainment into work. It's like it's no longer entertainment's supposed to be peaceful. Entertainment. The word entertainment means to be led down the garden, to enter the garden path. To be led down the garden path is not really about peace. It's about being taken on a journey through the fantasy. But it's supposed to produce some kind of peace. And a lot of our entertainment is pretty intense. It's pretty harsh. It's got a lot to do with life and death and violence. And a lot of these like really intense themes, which if we look at them, have strong parallels with Saturn. right? Saturn is old age, it's dying, it's suffering. A lot of the films that we're watching, they're not lovely, peaceful, beautiful little adventures. They are adventures of like harshness that are reflecting the harsh realities of life. So I see what you're saying there. You know, it makes perfect sense. I don't know as well, you know, now that I think about it, and I hope I'm not making too much background noise. I'm making myself a cocoa because I really do feel I missed out on my cocoa today. Only had 1 cup, and for me on a Saturday, 1 cup of cocoa is like a crime. But yeah, I do think that on another level, our lives are becoming overtly Saturnized. I mean, if you think of the economy, right, and money is so very much tied to Saturn. The act of commerce is essentially Saturn, and the act of the actual exchanging and the movement of the goods, that's mercurial. But that's why if you look at the center of this little chart that we've got on the page here, you can see very clearly at the heart of the Saturn story, we've got Mercury dancing there. And so that's quite relevant to understanding this relationship between communication and work, right? Because I would say if you were going to look for one word to represent what Saturn represents, work would be the best word, right? Work and the application of one's agency. And so we are sort of like lost in this world where we are having to work 2 jobs, or having to work Saturdays, or having to work 6 days a week. Most families, the parents don't get that time to spend with their kids because they're always working. I work from home, and I'm very busy a lot of the time as well. So, I can only imagine what it's like for poor people that have to go to work every day and be away from their kids all day long and get home and be really knackered and tired. I feel really lucky that I do get to be at home and to be able to see my son a lot and keep an eye on him and make sure he's not starting World War III or anything, which he usually is on the cards. That's very much his mission. But any 9-year-old boy should be trying to start World War III. If they're not, they're missing out on an important chapter of their masculine energy, because masculinity is inherently destructive in its developmental phases. And you can see this with animals. Like here in the Penguin Sanctuary, we had a male cat. We've got wild cat out here, yeah? And this male cat had put down, I think, 25 penguins. And it was just practicing. It went to master hunting. I was having a bit of fun, But it was a male cat, adolescent. So you see in animals in nature as well, especially predators. When the male young predators are learning their way, they become destructive. And I think Saturn represents an element of this destructive force. What would you guys say about that?
That Saturn is a destructive force, or what were you saying?
Sorry, I had to make a Whoops. I had to make a transition there from my other from my phone to my system. But yeah, I would say, you can hear me, yeah?
Yeah, I can hear you.
You can hear me okay, yeah? Good,
yeah,
good. Just in case it's gone all weird. Yeah, the whole idea of Saturn representing time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at what time represents entropy, right? And it represents both the forces of creation and entropy. But the forces of creation and entropy represents that which was being destroyed so that something new can be created, so that that new thing can be destroyed to create something new. Destruction is sort of fundamental to the whole process, is it not?
Yeah, it seems to be part of the issue of the process, because I think in a lot of ways, the function that chaos serves in the universe is for sort of new forms of order to be created. So the way you can think about it is like you have some kind of like, let's say you have some very elaborate structure of cubes that you've set up, and then some kind of terrible, I don't know, psionic storm appears out of nowhere and all your cubes get smashed up, right? But then you wait a minute, I can make these into diamonds and into all these kind of other weird, different kind of shapes. And then because you have that storm tear up the cubes, now you have a new form of order to create from what you didn't have before. So in a lot of ways, I think chaos is sort of the wellspring of creativity. It gives order. It's like, hey, here's a new load of junk that I can organize into something, interesting. And I think that's the real sort of missing element here is the ability to find order within chaos, to have the creative mind to sort of to see the connections that aren't necessarily there. And I think that's kind of something that's I think is sort of lost, in our world. Because I've been thinking lately about how, so much of in humankind and, human life in general, that we depend upon our insight about the world in regard to either like experts or gurus. Like, because I was thinking about like, what makes someone really confident in what they believe in? Like, because that's something that's always really puzzled me, throughout my whole life. And I think in my head all these different like, psychological reasons and philosophical reasons and, emotional biases and stuff. And I, figured out some things here and there. But I've been thinking lately, the real convincer for most people is simply just trusting that someone understands the ideas better than you do. It's like, like a lot of people will say like, they believe in materialism simply because, they trust that some physicists understand this better than I do. Or, some other religion, they trust that the priest or the guru better understands it than I do. But I've always been the kind of person that's like, no, I need to understand it on my own terms. I don't like it when someone uses something that I can't understand and then uses that against me to either try to confuse me, manipulate me, or to try to, hold something against me. And having your own, understanding of the world and be able to figure it out for your own terms via your own sort of creative means, I think is something that's we're losing more and more these days. So I think if anything, it's like, we're using Saturn for all the wrong ways instead of the imagination. I think one of the good ways we could use Saturn that I don't see being implemented in our world these days is sort of the lack of like, discipline and time and effort. In a lot of ways, like when you have any kind of piece of artwork, whether it's, a film, a piece of music, a painting, or a video game, you always can tell that the ones that are the best to me are the ones where you can tell the artist was having a lot of fun making it. They were kind of engaged in the creative process, they come up with ideas. And I kind of feel with AI and all of that, that aspect is getting lost. Not to make this into an AI discussion, because I know that will turn into a whole can of worms on its own thing. I think we all are already aware of the fundamental dangers of AI. But I think it ties into the same theme of sort of, trusting, a blind authority, right? And trusting that someone else understands things. I've been thinking about like how many people, understand the world because they're playing a game of telephone that, their parents told them something, their priest told them something, their professor told them something. And I realized like how rare it is to just be like, okay, I'm going to try to figure out reality on my own terms and like set up experiments and do that. And I don't have that sense of like, I have a consensus that I can go to. I can trust that somebody else, knows something more than I do. I don't have that trust. So I have to figure it out on my own. And I realize that a lot of people, they don't have that. They don't have that aspect. They feel like they just kind of, they're a sheep and they got to follow the shepherd, And I'm saying I think a lot more people need to be their own shepherds, because I don't think these shepherds know where they're leading the sheep.
I love that you said that, brother. We're often on the same wavelength, It's like I was just thinking about the etymology, and you started speaking about leading. And it's interesting because when we look at the roots of the word sigil, right? They say it goes to Latin, but like Latin's a young language, okay? We must never, ever tolerate anybody else or any Google or any AI ever telling us that etymology goes back to Latin, because that will just be complete and utter BS. Because Latin was just a group of languages coming together, heavily influenced by Greek. Let's not ever pretend that that's not the case. And then influenced by, you know, the Proto-Germanic and other different European languages at the time, and sort of coming together as sort of consensus language of different tribes that had been brought under the same umbrella. Some Phoenician, some Hebrew elements, some different elements were probably all part of the mix. But yeah, it's a young language. I think Latin is, am I right? Is Latin about 1,400 years old? I think that's the age. Latin's first texts, what is it? 600 AD. Am I right? I think it could be something like that.
I actually don't know the answer to this.
Yeah. Those date back. The first Latin texts ever date back to the 6th, 7th centuries of BC. Right? So if we're referring to 600, near 600 AD, this marks the bridge between late Latin and medieval Latin, right? And the texts of the pivotal period primarily reflect the church and the transmission classical learnings. And so before then, it was much more Greek, right? It was much more Greek influence, so that the Latin language literally developed over time. Yeah. And so, yeah, without getting lost in that whole story, the word sigil, I've got it up here on the screen. You can see I just said sigil etymology, PIE, Proto-Indo-European language group. Those are the old graveyard of super ancient languages that have become the substance from which our more modern languages have been built. And by modern, I mean the last 10,000 years, right? That's what I consider modern. Yes, I believe language has been recycling over hundreds of thousands of years. We have some very interesting, I don't know if you guys know about this, and it's probably a good place to point it out. There was a husband and wife couple, and I forget their name, that were anthropologists that went around the whole of Europe, and I think they went to something like 250 different cave sites where they had, very, very ancient rock carvings, which going back like 50, 60, 40, 30, 80, however many 100,000 years back. And what they noticed in a lot of these cave paintings, that there were these like funny little blocks across the bottom. And these blocks had like a pattern in them. And they were like dots and blocks. And they started noticing that all of these cave sites, many of these cave sites had these little blocks, and they weren't really spoken about much by the anthropologists. And they started noticing that there was some kind of a pattern in this, and realizing that this seemed to be some kind of, signs, very particular signs. Many of these signs that have not been cataloged in any modern languages. And they think that this might be the root of an ancient language, which is like tens of thousands of years old, at least, maybe 100. So language is not new. We talk about Phoenician being very old, or Sumerian being very old. These are just repackaged languages that come from older. And so when we speak of the Proto-Indo-European language group, we're talking about very ancient symbols that are a prelude to these modern group of languages that are probably the leftovers from more ancient languages, which are leftovers from more ancient languages, which is the leftovers of what this particular anthropologist couple were discussing. But without getting lost into that, this is food for thought. People go out and check this out. You'll be very interested and intrigued by what you find out. And the etymological roots of the word sigil is sequa. And sequa means, as you were saying, Cosmic, to follow. Isn't that interesting? Right? And it's an identifying mark or sign or token, right? And so you would make a sign for other people to follow. So what it was like the elders in the group, in the village, in the the tribe, would make these signs that the others would follow, and these signs would represent certain decisions. And I think that's how, like, we'll probably get to where writing starts to find its essential roots. And then obviously the Latin shifted it into classical Latin as signum, right? Which is then an identifying mark, sign, or token. But it's really interesting when we start to look at it, back in its roots, it has a lot to do with following. And I think, like, there's something to be said here, because if you imagine what a sigil is in magical art for a moment, right? And you put that into context. Can you guys hear that little dog squealing at the door?
I don't think so.
Okay, no, cool. I'm going to let him squeal a little bit more. Because he didn't want to come in when I called him in earlier. So I want him now to learn that this is not a la carte service that, like, just come and make a noise when you want to come in. Because I'm calling him, he's not interested. He's running around there. I'm out here. I'm doing my thing. Leave me alone. Then he wants to come here and be impatient. He can wait a few minutes. It won't hurt him. It's good training, actually. But I think, like, when we look at sigils as they're used in magical lore, it's sort of like a sign for the spirits to follow, right? If we go right back in time. So the ancient concept is that the universe is a structure of a line of beings that are like a chain. And this chain of beings are extended throughout the lateral potential dimensionality of this universe, this fractal state of consciousness. And if we then take that deeper and we take a look at it and we say, well, okay, that makes a lot of sense, right? We're looking at this very profound concept, right, of hyperdimensional quantum field of reality, and that this hyperdimensional quantum field is actually a living being. And we are all extensions of this living being, and it is made out of smaller living beings that work together to maintain the bigger living being, which are made out of smaller living beings that work together to maintain the big. And so it goes on and on and on and on to almost infinitum, just like in our physical bodies, where we have tissues that work together and organs that work together. The tissues work together to form organs that work together to form systems that work together to form this physical engine through which we can experience consciousness. And these are made out of, cells, and the cells are made out of, like, atoms, and, and these are all tiny little living beings, and there are microbes that operate backstage to keep everything together, to keep a cohesion between all of the organic principles running in here as well, so that they can have a synergetic exchange of energy throughout the systems. Because it's all based upon a cooperation. So when we look at the physical body, and we think, like, in the ancient times, they did also consider that the macrocosm was as the microcosm, that all of these little beings were then extended outwards, and that the physical universe was made out of these cosmic beings that are made out of smaller beings, and that we could influence these beings by making sigils. And the sigil was then a way that we could influence the bigger being to follow. Like, if you made a sigil to change the weather, right? That sigil was you making a appeal or a demonstration, a connection with this being that would control lightning or the rain, or bring you the necessary weather for your crops to be successful, or to bring animal, or to inspire you to find grazing for your animals, whichever it was that you were looking for. That sigil would then influence these cosmic beings that would then administrate over reality in much the same way that we speak of in Christian laws. There's the angels and the archangels and all the holy different beings and the elemental beings, and the beings that work for beings that work for beings that work for angels that work for archangels, that are part of the fundamental structure of reality. These sigils would be able to influence these beings. We would be able to bind these beings using these sigils. We would be able to influence them. We'd be able to appeal to them. So you can see how the word sigil from a magical perspective, has a lot to do with the concept of follow. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd say so. I guess when it comes to sigils, it's like there is that. I had a thought and just kind of like went away. I don't know.
Oh,
See, to me, I think when it comes to sigil magic, I think that a symbol always has a power if it sort of signifies something else, some kind of color, some kind of feeling, some kind of like thought. Because in a lot of ways, it's like you're taking something from that astral mental space, like, and then having that sort of that physical symbol drawn and manifested in physical space. You're essentially kind of creating a mirror sort of bridge between the two worlds, and thus manifesting the intent.
yeah, man, that makes a lot of sense. Welcome back, dear brother Indy. Good to see you back.
Yeah.
It must be getting warm there. We haven't seen you without a top on for a while. Woo! You see the girls all clapping in the background.
We had a hot winter, and then it was kind of cool in the beginning of spring, and then it's starting to warm up now. Getting towards the summer climates, really. But it's nice. It's good to have the warm weather. A lot of people, it's too much. And I love it. I conditioned myself when the heat started to come when I moved down to the south by laying in the sun as long as I could, and then going for a jog, and then jumping in the hot tub until it was just too hot, and then I spray myself with cold water. Now nothing really phases me, and if anybody's bothered by the heat, you could try that too. But it's nice to get heat and cold exposure back to back. They both have different benefits, and it's really helpful. So for a lot of stuff. So, but I love what you guys were talking about, breaking down the etymology of sigil and looking back at the syncretism of that. I appreciate you guys for doing that. And I was trying to listen in, but I didn't get as much as I wanted to out of it because I was a bit distracted. But I'll look into that myself. What were some of the tips on it? What was the main thing on the sigil etymology? Follower, yeah.
In its earlier roots, it related to follow, and then it developed to mean a sign. But a sign is something you would make to follow. Let's say I'm going out to find water, and my tribe is going to follow. Then I would leave signs for them to say this way, water, right? And so you could see how that would have evolved. And then from a magical perspective, to imply like I want to manifest this, so I'm leaving signs for the spirits to follow, right? Or the cosmic beings, the angels, whatever we want to consider them as. So there seems to be an element that relates to this, but it's really interesting, as we look at these notions. I think there's definitely a powerful synchronicity here when we look at this. And namaste. I see Carly has joined us. D Love is in the house. D Love and Carly and Out Tuition. Been a little while, Out Tuition. How you doing? I hope you're well. Hope you're thriving. Hope you're having Out Tuition. You missed the most prolific discussion on Friday. I hope you know it's got the word shaman in it. You will not find another lecture like that anywhere. I flew off the handle and just let rip, as it were. And you will not find another discussion like that anywhere, in any book, anywhere. So go and check it out, man. It's not. I'm not usually proud of the work, but that was a piece of beautiful synchronicity that came at a time when the moon was riding through Scorpio. The moon coming through Scorpio, very powerful time. My North Node being in Scorpio, the occult energy flowing through me at that time was just, let's rock this occult knowledge. But yeah, I do think that there's definitely quite a profound link here between what we see as sigils and the signs, and that then takes us back to geometry, right? Because like, what is geometry? I suppose it's probably a good place to start. Geometry has got to do with measurement, right? Measuring the proverbial firmament and showing the relative proportions of space and time. Would you say that is a good description of geometry?
Yeah, that's awesome, like kind of like cosmic description of it. And I think there's so many different ways to interpret geometry. I feel like it also could be represented as a mapping of the relations of things in distance. And so that could be like many things in different types of distance. Like we also have people represent like with geometry, like how the spirit might look, or like with yantras and stuff and sacred geometry, kind of give like spiritual things an image that kind of relate to them, and have certain aspects of numerology and different curvature of shapes that conjure up like various feelings and emotional connotations and stuff. So I feel like there's geometry that's just practical geometry, and then there's sacred geometry. So it's unfolded into so many different dimensions in itself. People could see it as like an engineer, that it's just rudimentary, maybe the language of God even sometimes. Or other people could say that it's kind of a thing that allows us to transcend the mundane and then go into deeper sets of mind, where we could kind of use the imagery of the sacred geometry to open up different portals of the mind, or different channels of the mind that can look into a deeper, complex way of seeing things, instead of the typical box or circle or whatever's more familiar. So I feel like these images conjure up like maybe cymatics, things that are like more resonant to the subconscious mind, that kind of like really jive with us and give us good feelings. Like the symmetry of them in sacred geometry is like a thing that gives people ease of mind and releases peptides. And the interplay of like curves and straight lines does a different thing. So there's a lot that happens from geometry, and I think it could be considered definitely associated with mapping the earth and the heavens. And in a lot of ways, people have used some geometry to map the underworld as well, in their little designs of what it might be. So it's a fabulous application to so many things, magical and practical. Yeah. And the Euclidean geometry.
Did you break up, or are you with me? Cosmic, are you with us? Is this my internet that's gone deaf? People in the chat, can you hear what's being said by Indy? Hello? Could somebody please tell me what's going on? Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Can anybody hear me? Okay, let's see. Okay, good. I was just checking whether it was my system that was giving a flack, or whether it was Indy's system, in case I'm talking over Indy and I'm just messing up the conversation for everybody. So Indy has now officially fallen off. He'll be back. Maybe his battery went flat. Carly, I saw a comment from Carly there talking about how the enneagram. Yeah, there's something quite powerful about the enneagram, isn't there? Used to be obsessed with 90 degrees and 45. Yeah, have you guys thought about the pentagram? And the pentagram is so powerful. So, okay, let's take a look at it. Let's break it down, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get it flowing round, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see what's going up and down, ladies and gentlemen. So at the center of the Saturn square, we've got the number 5, right? 5 for the pentagram. 1919. Synchronicities all around. You just can't beat it. You can't make it up, but you can't break it down. So at the heart of our 8, here's a very interesting concept. Saturn's number is 8, but 8 manifests as 9. I want you just to digest what I'm saying. So 8 is the mystic number of 9. So 9's mystic number is 8. And so when we're thinking about Saturn in its manifestational form, we think about the number 9, right? Very important to recognize this. And at the center and the heart of this process, we have number 5, which is rather interesting. And number 5, sitting at the heart of this enneagram, is the pentagram. And the pentagram represents movement and change. And so when we're looking at sigils, they have to contain these elements. They have to contain the principle of Mercury. They have to contain that principle of movement. They have to contain the principle of crystallization, right? The number 4, which represents the proverbial knowledge, the builder, the structure. But then they have to become a synergy between the movement and the crystal structures of number 4 to become the dynamic movement of crystallization, which is number 8. So hence it relates to time, the lords of time, number 8. And this is the structure of building and also maintaining the status quo. I think we got Indy Sage back. Is Indy back? You fell off quite early in your little conversation before. Do you want to pick up where you were?
Yeah, I would, but I've been trying to focus on trying to get back to the show. I kind of lost where I left off at. Do you guys remember what I was saying at Sam?
Well, I was trying to see whether it was my system that was messing up or your system. I didn't know what had happened. Cosmic's not with us.
I'm back. I was off. I was out for a bit.
What I remember you talking about, I think, was let me go back a moment, because I just started talking about something else. It makes it tricky. I need to backtrack and miss where I am. But I think the last thing that before I was talking about the synergy of number 5 and the pentagram and the representation of phi.
Yeah,
we were talking about, were you going to go into that? We were talking about how the definition of
golden ratio,
geometry.
Yeah.
And then you started talking about a different definition of geometry, which was space and movement being categorized, right?
Uh-huh.
And then you started talking about the earth, and I don't know, at that point I lost you. I don't know if you were still talking and maybe we couldn't hear you.
Yeah.
Maybe if the people in the chat heard more than me, then
I was trying to get to talking about the Euclidean geometrists having used the 5-pointed blazing star as it's kind of a secret symbol of their secret society that they had of mathematicians that were involved in sacred geometry and stuff. And the blazing star has 5 within it. The 5-pointed star creates a pentagon within it that you can draw another star in and continually draw stars within stars. And the ratio of the star to star is the phi ratio. So it contains within it the golden ratio, and that's kind of like a secret code of the 5-pointed star. And 5 being a number of transformation. Also, the blazing star associated with fire. Fire is a transformer as well. Probably associating with the sun because it's got the golden ratio and it's blazing. The sun is like a fiery blazing celestial body. But interestingly, if you take a Merkaba or a 6-pointed star, and you draw an X within it, it creates 2 5-pointed stars above and below, in addition to the 6-pointed star. So, which is pretty cool. I thought that was fun, worth mentioning.
Yeah, that's how you build a geodome.
Yeah.
You build the geodome by creating a pentagram with hexagrams around it.
Nice.
Encircled, encased.
Yeah.
Or is it a hexagram with pentagrams encircled around it? I forget, but it's a structure of pentagrams and hexagrams that fit together, and you create that on a flat plane out of shapes, like whatever materials you're going to use. And once you've created that geometric grid, which is essentially one big circle, you then pop it up, right? And when you pop it up, it becomes the geodome. It's incredible to build them. Like I remember having so much fun putting them up. And
Buckminster Fuller created the geodesic dome in Epcot Center and was known for doing like geodomes. And he actually was responsible having discovered the buckyball, which is like a carbon structure molecule that contains within it like space dust from like long ago, because things get captured within the buckyball, which is named after Buckminster Fuller, that created the geodomes as well. He actually started the Black Mountain College over here outside of Asheville, North Carolina, where I live. And he was a really inspirational figure in like the 60s and 70s and stuff. Had brought like amazing sacred mathematics to like architecture and stuff. So it was like really groundbreaking stuff that he was doing. A real visionary. And one of the quotes of Buckminster Fuller is that Earth is like a spaceship with 100 different captains trying to go 100 different ways. And I think I'm kind of paraphrasing somewhat with that. Pretty much expression. But he has a lot of really good quotes. This talks about nature. You can't fight against nature because she'll come back 10 times stronger. I believe that was something he said as well.
Buckminster Fuller also came up with the fundamental math behind the 64 grid tetrahedron system, didn't he? The 64 I Chings.
Yeah.
And I think it was Buckminster Fuller that basically outlined this for people, which is really amazing when you get right down to it, you know, which basically is that there are, in order to create an equilibrated vector equilibrium, and a vector equilibrium means that all the vectors are balanced, and that there is a state of the eye in the middle of the proverbial storm is what we're talking about, right? That at the point of the center of the equilibrium vector or series of vectors that are in a state of equilibrium, there would be total rest. And so they could speak of it as the vector equilibrium. And in order to do this, you would need to have 64 vectors. And these 64 vectors would effectively create a grid. And that was the vector equilibrium grid. And that's very interesting because this is the maths of time-space, essentially. And so this Buckminster Fuller was using geometry to understand the nature of a what do you call it? The where things emerge from, the event horizon, right?
Yeah.
This is the maths of the event horizon, essentially what we're talking about here, fundamentally. And that, there's this key to understanding that the event horizon is effectively bound by these 64 elements. And it gets very interesting because obviously we're looking at the I Ching, right? And the I Ching has, if you look at the I Ching, just let's look at the I Ching carefully. Let me pull it up for us so that we can get I Ching 64. They call them trigams, right? Which is the easiest translation, I believe, that they have. Trigams. I think that's what they're called. Trigrams. And so if we look at them, let me try and find all 64. Is that all 64? Let's see. Well, yeah, I suppose there is an element here that shows us. So it's very, very interesting that you would have, for example, 3 lines, yeah? And those 3 lines represent broken or fixed lines, right? And have I got a good representation of it? I can't add that to the stage. Hello, I've got to remove that one first. Excuse me. So let's add this to the stage. It's not really what I'm looking for. I will try and find a better one because we can do better. This is probably a good example of one that looks prettier. It's a much prettier looking thing, isn't it? Definitely has a better look. But if we observe this and we take a look at what's going on here, right? So when you're working with the I Ching, you always have to have six sticks, right? And I'm sure you'll be very familiar with this, right, Indy? And probably most of you. Am I right? Who of you in the chat have worked with the I Ching, by the way? And you have an idea of how it works? I'll give you an idea of what we're talking about. Basically, you got to create 2 trigrams. And these 2 trigrams that you got to create are usually with 6 sticks. You would throw 6 sticks on the floor. And depending on how these sticks fall, they would represent a closed line or a fixed line. You can do them with coins. So people would throw 2 sets of 3 coins or a set of 6 coins, but usually 2 sets of 3. This is normally how it's done. And so a set of 3 coins, and you would draw a line, a fixed line, an open, broken line, or a fixed line. And then you throw a second set of coins, and it would be a fixed line, a broken line, a set line. And how the universe works is like this, right? Let me show you with my hands because it's really hard to put into perspective for you. So if you imagine, right, just for a moment, let me try and show you. So imagine you've got a triangle, and the triangle is like this, right? Then you've got that triangle, and then you've got your inverse triangle. You then got a hexagram. So this is made out of hexagrams. You would have maybe the triangles would be like this. Which lines are on top and which lines are underneath? That's really important. So you would be able to create an angular shape to the hexagram based upon whether the lines are fixed or broken. For example, a broken line means that there's another line going over the top of it. A fixed line means that the line's going over the top. So those effectively those trigams, right, represents a hexagram. That's why there's 6 lines. 3 and 3. But which line is over the top? And the line that's underneath is the broken line. The line that's over the top is a fixed line. And so you've got these 6 potentials of fixed and broken lines. And I think it has to do with the angular, like think of them as dials that are turning in a circle. You've got 64 potentials. Our 32 potentials superimposed over another 32 potentials. 32, why 32? Okay. Are you guys holding on to your chairs? Girls, hold on to your chairs. Guys, hold on to your chairs because this might blow your mind. There are 22 archetypes in the major arcana, right? And there are 10 numerations when we look at the enneagram as a moving system. If we look at the enneagram as static, there are 9. But if we look at the enneagram as a moving system, it means that the 10 has to move across the event horizon to reemerge as the 10, back to the 1. So there has to be a 10th. So for the enneagram to complete its cycle and begin its next cycle, it has to go from 1 to 9. Then Mars has to cross the event horizon and it has to come out again, reborn as 10. This is how our numeric system works. So there would be 10 Sefirot. The 10th Sefirot, which is Malkut in the Kabbalah, for example, represents all of the other 9 working together as a structure. So you have the 9 fundamental Sefirot and the 10th, which is the Guf, which is the physical body in the Malkut, which is the physical realm, but that represents all of the activities and actions of all the other together in a synergized fashion, producing the synchronicity of 10. So when you take into account that there are 22 archetypal relationships between the 10 fundamental principles, you end up with 32. So this is why in the I Ching, you have 2 sets of 32, right? That's why you have 64 trigoms, because you have a set of upward facing 32 trigoms and a set of downward facing 32 trigoms. In other words, yang and yin, 32 yang trigoms and 32 yin directional trigoms. So when you understand what the I Ching is saying, it is speaking the language of Kabbalah. I know it's a lot for people to digest because we've been told that the Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism and all that other BS nonsense. Well, it isn't. The Jews just got hold of it and used it, and they put a bit of work into it. They kept it nicely, and okay, they called it by a name, Kabbalah, which they may have invented or they may have just borrowed that name from older sources. Who knows? Who cares? Take the name out of it. It's the mysteries of the Tree of Life. Big love, namaste, Hollowbone Hawk. Always lovely to have you. I hope everything's going well at home. Are you having pizza night? Hollowbone Hawk makes some pretty impressive pizzas. Oh yeah, baby. We're talking about a pizzeria. So yes, basically these 32 principles then become, when put into a state of harmony and balance, facing the negative potentials of itself, become 64 trigrams. And so that's 64 are the 64. Now, okay, let's step out of the Kabbalah. Let's step out of Taoism. Let's go into Gnosticism. Okay. So what is Gnosticism? Gnosticism basically postulates that there was first there was Yaldabaoth, and Yaldabaoth split up into 2. That was Iao and Tsabaoth, and these then split and became a multitude of beings that were drawn out of the body of Yaldabaoth, because these were all elements of Yaldabaoth that were emerging from Yaldabaoth. And this is the process of creation from the Gnostic perspective. Right. And once the creation was fulfilled, there were 72 principal figures reigning over the etheric field. Right? Great. That's lovely, isn't it? It's perfect. Like, why would there not be 72 elements reigning over the etheric field? What were those 72 elements? And people, here we go once again. Are you ready? Let's go. Ready Player One. There were 64 angels. Are we doing the math? 64 angels. And these angels came in pairs, right? Not apples, not grapes, pairs. Very important. No, not those pairs, the other pairs. Come on, people, let's have a giggle. Life's too short not to. So these pear-shaped angels, sorry, I'm being really cheeky. I have pear-shaped angels. It doesn't sound right, does it? But anyway, you got to have a sense of humor. Life's short. These pairs represented the yang yin aspects of the 32, right? Which is what the Kabbalah and what the I Ching. And by the way, in the Kabbalah, I want to just point this out to you. You have the 32 parts of the tree, the microcosmic tree, and then you have the 32 parts of the macrocosmic tree. And when you put together the microcosmic and the macrocosmic tree, you have 64 parts. Very important. You are seen backing in to one tree, but there is a tree in front of you. And these trees are negative to positive. So this is important to recognize and realize, like within the actual path working of the Kabbalah. So the Kabbalah relates to 64 elements, right? The Gnostic angels were 64 angels. They were ruled over by 7 angels, right? The archangels. And these 7 archangels were ruled over by 1, right? And so this Azazel, this main, you could call him whatever you want, was the fundamental ruling principle of Yaldabaoth as ruling over all of the system, which breaks down to 72. So when you've got the fundamental pivot and the 7 archangels, that makes 8. And when you add the 8 to the 64 angels, you end up with the 72 quinets. And this is the basis of our Western astrology. So you can see how all of these things are convoluted but tied together in a very careful web of correspondences. And so, yeah, there's a little cute little journey for us to journey into. And 7 powers, 7 principalities, exactly. Our tuition, exactly. So effectively, yeah, we can and then we got the 7 main, 7 main everythings, and that sort of brings us back to the story here, right? When we look at the enneagram and we carefully construct what is going on with the enneagram, right? When we're looking at the 7, we're looking at Neptune. We're looking at the mystic. We're looking at that which is the fundamental structure within, right? And that fundamental structure within is the domain of the spirit. And when the domain of the spirit becomes self-actualized, it becomes number 8, which is the balance between the spiritual and the physical. Saturn, which is that dynamic expression of the number 4, where time becomes the expression that ties together the past and the future. Because we got the past, which is the mystic internal reality, and we got the future, which is number 4, the crystallized structure that we're moving towards. We're moving from antimatter to matter, right? We're moving from chaos to order and structure. And number 7 is where this whole process becomes internalized, going back to the beginning. Back to the beginning. Where number 4 is looking towards the end, number 7 is looking towards the beginning. So you've got to understand this convolution of potential here. And number 8 then becomes the structure that ties the beginning to the end, time, the alpha and the omega. So what we call L in the Bible, or the lore of the Judaism that became Christianity. And but that goes way back as well. L didn't start there. L obviously goes right back to early Babylonia. I I saw your face twitching, Indy. There was something you wanted to throw on the table.
Oh, I was just thinking about the planets and stuff, but yeah, I also wanted to mention that there was 64 hexagrams in the I Ching, and there's 8 trigrams. So it's kind of like interplay of the 6 and the 8 with that. The 6 being part of 8 squared, 64. 64 making 10. But then we have the 7 ruling ones with the archangels of the 64 angels. That's kind of interplay of 8 and 7 and 6, with 6 being part of 8 squared again. But yeah, I was loving that we were doing the breakdown of the Enneagram too. And it's interesting that the number 5 Mercury and the number 7 Neptune are very much imaginative, mystical, very creative ones. And then on the even ones, they're kind of more grounded, whereas the odd numbers tend to seem to be a little bit more like spirited. And I was just kind of noticing that aspect. In Chinese numerology, the even numbers are considered to be unbalanced with no center, and the odd numbers are considered to be more fortunate and luckier because they have a center point and then they're balanced on the edge. On either side.
I thought to share with you guys as well, just if you don't know, Saturn in astrology, just to understand, now we're getting into the Sigil story. Okay, so now we're sort of like setting the scene, if you will, and we can like really start to dismantle this and like tie the sigils. Like, how does this relate to sigils? Because otherwise we're just having a funky conversation, which is cool. Funky conversations rock. I dig funky conversations. In fact, the only kind of conversation to ever have is a funky one. If the conversation don't have funk in it, then you're like, funk this. I ain't gonna do this convo. You gotta have the right jacket to have a really cool conversation. As the metaphor goes, the jacket represents the information. Ziyal, namaste, grand rising, Ziya bonanza, 999. I like that. That's quite funky. Z9 bonanza. Unsecured signal. Woo, you bring your leash to the party. Nice. Welcome, unsecured Lush and Zia Bonanza. Hope you guys are well. I managed to say your names, which is pretty cool. It's a start. We're getting there. And to all the rest of you, I hope you guys are following the conversation. I'm sure you are. You probably like follow me. I'm right 3 steps ahead of you. Whatever. You guys are probably like on right up there. Right up there, up ahead on the path somewhere. So what was I going to say? The notion of sigil as it relates to Saturn. So when we look at astrology, and I think I've got the right screen on here. So in astrology, let me make this bigger so that you can read it nicely. This is like a very crude look at it, but if you research this, you will find out, especially if you look into the occult science of it, you're going to find out more of this. So in astrology, Saturn obviously relates to karmic matters and to do with karmic coding, structure, right? And cosmic time, as we've been saying, right? Karmic is that alpha and omega. That's the tying together the knots that I was talking about a few minutes ago of the future and the past, the alpha and the omega, and is sort of the strict teacher. So it governs obviously the rules and the limitations, and it's the discipline required to uncover the deeper meanings in written language, alphabets, and symbolic text. I want you guys to digest that for a moment. So when we are decoding the occult nature and the esoteric nature of things, we are riding on the wave of Saturn. We are sitting in Saturn's hand, and Saturn is holding us forth with the hand, showing us like, this is the way. You got to think of the Mandalorian. Saturn is like one grand Mandalorian going, this is the way, you know? And Saturn's way is the way of the Mandalorian, and it rocks. It always rocks. So the decoding of the text is the Saturnian energy. It's that very intense concentration and focus necessary to understand the contracts between different ideas. And so we got obviously Capricorn, which is understanding the practical structures, and the Aquarius, which is the conceptual relativities. And so your Saturn placement is obviously going to be fundamental, and Mercury, because Mercury is the communicator. Like my Mercury is, what do you call that? We got some astrologers in the house. What do you call when your Mercury is less than 1 degree? My Mercury is a lot less than 1 degree, man. It's like right on top of the sun. It's got a name. Anyway, and it's sitting in the midhaven in the house of the sun, like bang in the middle, like bang in the midhaven. So it's sort of like relevant, and I'm born under the sign of the sun with my Mercury in that midhaven with the sun. So it carries that solar power with the mercurial element, which is why I'm able to communicate these things. And obviously, you know, Mercury is at the heart of the Saturn square when we look at it. So there's a reason for all of these synchronicities that we're experiencing and observing. So just to give you an idea, the sickle symbol, right? The sickle. Now, I don't like the sickle because I am sick of the sickle. Okay? I want to be clear about this. I'm damn sick of the sickle. So let's say Saturn sign. Probably have to call it the sigil.
Is it called the Kazemi? 1 degree of the
yes,
Kazemi.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm like ridiculous Kazemi. I'm like as close as Kazemi can be. That's how close I am. I'm like, is it seconds or minutes? It's minutes, right? A degree is a degree an hour? Anyway, I'm minutes apart from. So that's why it's like bang on my midheaven with my sun and my in such an extremely close conjunction. So and obviously Saturn's placement very important as well. And Mars, you know, Scorpio, the feminine side of Mars, in order to be able to dive deep and experience the things directly. That's the experiential thing, Mars. So Mars and Saturn have a very special relationship. You're going to find all these youngsters. And I want to prepare you guys for the youngsters, by the way. You've seen them, but you haven't had a veteran tell you about the youngsters, right? And the youngsters are great. You know, they read a lot of books, which is good, right? Well, I don't know. Is it good? I don't think it's good when it comes to the occult. I think reading books is good when you're like reading about food and how to prepare food and how to build a house and all of that. When it comes to the occult, books get in your way. They actually crystallize your mind into perceptions that will prevent you from actually seeing what's hidden, right? So here we go. Even they're mentioning it here, the crescent. That's good to know, man. The crescent. The cross and the crescent, right? So the cross represents the square, the cube, right? And the crescent represents the inner realm. So the cube represents physical manifestation, and the crescent represents the inner. So the crescent is related to the moon. So let's see. Saturn, sigil, sign, astrology. Let's get the picture so I can put the picture in front of you, because that's the gold. No, we didn't want that one. We want this one. That's the one we're looking for, ladies and gentlemen. We have nailed it. We have brought the show home. So this is what we're talking about. And this is a really, really bad one. So forgive me for finding such a terrible one. I will find out. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. That's more like it. They have all this stylized nonsense that is just like, makes me want to vomit. Excuse me for being so crude, but it makes me want to vomit. So there we go, Saturn. And that is even too stylized for my liking. I would not do that. I would not offend Saturn with such a sign, but it's getting there. So firstly, that cross should be a correct cross, right? What cross should it be? Is it an equal arm cross? No, it is not an equal arm cross. It is the cross that we saw Emmanuel sacrificed on. It represents the crossing of matter and the emergence of light from the epicenter of the event horizon. The event horizon is that central place we were talking about earlier, which is at the center, at the heart, where there is total rest around which everything revolves, right? So it's within the heart, and Mercury sits upon this heart. So the bottom part is a crescent, right? And the top part is a cross. Why is it the cross of Emmanuel? Because if you fold the cross of Emmanuel up, right, it will become a cube. So imagine you got that cross and you can fold the bottom around, it folds into a cube. If you were to draw that cross out of squares, right, draw 6 squares, 1 square, 2 squares, 3 squares, 4 squares, and 5 squares, those 5 squares would then become a cube, because you would fold each of the square on the sides backwards, you'd fold the square on top backwards, and you'd fold the 2 squares underneath backwards, and the 1 square would be the bottom, and the other square would fold back in on itself to become the other side. And these squares would then represent the and there would be 6 squares, sorry, because there would be a square in the center. There would be a square in the center. So there'd be a square in the center with a square above, square on the right, a square on the left, and 2 squares underneath. And so the 5 squares orbiting the 1 square would make 6 in total. So that would be how you would represent a cross. Now this cross is represented here, representing all of these squares, and how these 6 squares represent the cube of space. Very important. So that's why it's that type of cross. And the crescent represents, obviously, the number 2, right? Number 2 is ruled by the crescent. You see I put a crescent here? Because the crescent is literally the sign for the moon. And so you're going to hear all these youngsters talking about the Saturn moon matrix because they've read books about it. Okay, let them talk, let them go. Let them yap and yap. It's all fine. And there's some element of truth to what these kids are talking about, but they don't know what they don't know. You see, there's only so much you're going to get from books. Only so much, just like anything in life, right? You actually have to have the experience to be able to put it into practice. And this is what's lacking in the younger generation, the TikTok generation, the YouTube. There are many people that read a lot of books. They do a lot of research. It's really cute. It's really sweet. It's really lovely. And not all of them are younger. A lot of them are older people that just, they glorify books. And so just like all the people that wrote the books, they're more interested in reading the books and less interested in the practice. But the real occultist is not so interested in the reading of the books. They're more interested in the practice. That's a video that I made. It's in my video section. Go and check. If you go to Bush Whisperer into my thing, click videos, not live, videos in my cross panel and in my section, and you'll see in the videos section, it's the last video that I made. And I really dive into what's the heart of sorcery for people to gain an understanding of the difference between the experiential model of actually putting into practice and learning. Like, for example, would you rather have somebody who read lots of books about surgery, doing surgery on your child or you, or would you rather have somebody who has done 1,000 surgeries in their past successfully, doing surgery on you or your child? Which would you prefer? Would you rather have somebody who read books about building houses come and build your house for you, hope it doesn't fall on your head when you're sleeping? Or would you rather have somebody who has built 1,000 houses in the past come and build your house for you? So I mean, these are simple questions, aren't they? Like sort of blatantly obvious in a sense. But that is the reality that we need to be conscious of, mindful of. So yeah, the practitioners are very different to the theory, the theoreticians. And so you'll find all these kids talking about the Saturn moon matrix. And some of the words they're saying might be right? But understanding what that means, if you haven't touched the lunar potential, if you haven't had the communication with the spirit of the moon yourself directly, if you haven't had the communications with the spirit of Saturn yourself directly, and if you haven't been able to sit between the two intelligences yourself directly, you're not going to know what that means. No matter how many books you read, no matter how many YouTubes you watch, no matter how much research you do, it's just going to be a little intellectual exercise that you're doing, which is, it's okay as exercises go, but it is not going to be the truth. And there are a lot of people that have done a lot of research into this, and they can read books and they can regurgitate the books beautifully, and it sounds so wow and so impressive, but it's not real. So we're going to look at what's real now for a moment. We're going to dive into it, like really dive into what is the story here with the lunar. So the lunar potential is that energy which is taking in. It's the crescent, right? It is capturing. It is the intelligence of the spirit of water, right? It operates through the element of air. Yeah, I know it sounds confusing. This is why the Western Kabbalists relate the moon to the element of air, and the Oriental Kabbalists relate the moon to the element of water. There's a mystical relationship between the etheric and the astral that are different. And the moon represents one thing to the astral, and the moon represents a different thing to the etheric. And unless you have gone into the etheric and investigated it thoroughly, or unless you have gone into the astral and investigated it thoroughly, and through the astral made communication with the spirit of the moon, and through the etheric made communication with the spirit of the moon, you will not know the difference. And you will not understand what is the substance of this Saturn moon matrix. And it will become the substance of conspiratorial stories and conspiracy theories and all this other hip hop nonsense that everybody's farting around, which is fine because like it keeps people entertained. And I'd rather people were entertained with occult conversations rather than what shoes they're wearing or what label t-shirts they have or how many women they had sex with. So, it is better than the alternative, right? But when we look at the connection here with the moon's energy, right, and Saturn, why does the moon's crescent sit upon the sigil, the sign of Saturn, right? Very important. Can I bring it up? No, I can't. Let me bring it in. We got Indy popping in. So we see this crescent is emerging, right? We see the crescent emerging at the point of the cross, which is going back in on itself. The bottom of that cross is the part of the cross that folds back in on itself, like a spiral, right? And so it is the source, the root source of the cross, that the cross is emerging from the consciousness field. And this emergence, this crescent, which is essentially the spirit of the number 2, which is, and wait for it, in the Kabbalistic sense, we're speaking about Chokmah. Very important to understand this. Chokmah, what this represents. This represents potential. Represents the potential of energy. But not energy, I want us to be clear, the potential. Energy is represented by the number 6. Why the number 6? Because the number 6 represents harmony. What is energy? Energy is a harmonic expression between two poles of the principle of polarity. Polarity has not yet come into being in that fundamental state of the mental state, which is the crescent, which represents the internal structure of consciousness before it reaches the heart chakra. This is what we speak of as the unstruck sound. If you haven't heard it, you don't know it. You can read about it till you go blue in the face, but if you haven't heard it, you haven't experienced it, you don't know what you're talking about. And this is unfortunately what most of the writers who write about it, that is their predicament, right? Even the so-called West Indian gurus. Do you know how many Indian gurus I came across that were scared of me? They were literally scared of me. I was like, what are you scared of? They were like, have you smoked Indian, like big Naga cobra poison? They were scared because like they were afraid that of occult power, that I would use occult powers against them. And these are like big gurus. I had to move on, you know, and because, you know, when they come face to face with somebody who's channeling forces, a lot of them, they've read the Upanishads, and they've read all these Vedic scrolls and all this knowledge, but they don't have the experience to a full degree. And this is unfortunately a big problem. And most of the books that are written in this modern age are written by people that don't have experience, that copied books written by people who didn't have the experience, that copied books written by people who didn't have the experience. And this lack of experience goes right back to the beginning. And it involved somebody reading some ancient scrolls of the Vedas and thinking that they had decoded it, but they hadn't. So if you're using the knowledge of books to decode the esoteric and occult truths, good luck to you. You're going to fall flat on your ass. So when we look at this subtle, yeah, dear love, you know, the breath, the spirit of the breath will take us into the unstruck sound. We will interact with it directly, and we will get an idea of what that crescent represents. And this is the mysteries of the Svadhisthana chakra, right? Why the Svadhisthana chakra, the navel? It enters into the navel and it emerges from the navel as the Manipura. These two chakras, we are told that they are lower chakras and the lower elements, and that we need to go into the higher chakras. We need to understand what is represented in the higher chakras by the lower chakras, and that there is this fractal relationship between the two, and that the one emerges from the other and the other from one another. So, and this is only something, once again, we can experience. It's an experiential journey. It's not something that we can find by reading books or hearing other people tell us the truth, because that isn't, I can't tell you the truth. I can only give you glimpses of it, but recognize that it's the practice that's going to give you the insight. And the reality of insight is literally sight that goes inwards. So when we're speaking of the number 2 in the crescent, we're speaking about insight. So when we're looking back at this Saturn square, right? And we're looking at this, we are looking at insight with the crescent, and outsight with the cross. Let's simplify it. Outsight and insight, right? And the insight and the outsight produces a contraction. And that contraction is the number 2, right? And then we need to also recognize that this is once again embodied on the Saturn square. Once again, you can't find this information in books. Don't bother. You won't. I didn't find it in books. I found it through training, practice, training, practice. It's like martial arts. No amount of learning, no amount of studying, no amount of research. It really comes down to how many times you threw that damn punch, right? And once you've thrown that punch enough times, it becomes an actual punch. And then you learn to really wield that punch. And the same for a block or a kick or a strike, or how to move through the stances, or how to snap out that front kick, whichever, martial arts techniques you want to do, or how to tie them together in a chain and flow through the chain. It's all experiential. So when we look at this Saturn square here, and this is, I think, quite a useful little adventure in itself, right? What do we see? We see the green point moving in one direction, and we see the orange point moving in a different direction, right? So we see 8 as a tether. And the 8 as the tether expresses the 9 and the 7. Now, Indy was talking about the odd and the even just now. Remember what Indy said about the odd and the even. What was it you said, dear brother? Maybe Indy's stepped away for a moment. But the
What I
odd
was saying was
yeah.
the even numbers are considered to be unbalanced in Eastern numerology in not having a center if you lay them all the numbers out next to each other. Whereas the odd numbers have like a center point from which the two arms balance them out. And
it's
so
interesting too. There's an even number of even numbers, and there's an odd number of odd numbers. So it works out in the meta in that way too. There's 2, 4, 6, 8. That's 4 even numbers. Then 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. That's 5 odd numbers, which also has a center.
yeah, excellent. That's a great point. And also, so every odd number has 8 even gates. So 9 has 8 gates that connect each of the numbers to each other. So that's a really good point right there. And it's an interplay of the two aspects combined into one, which kind of brings some more light to the odd numbers, just being more than what they are in themselves, but also encapsulating their opposite within them too. So thanks for mentioning that. Awesome.
And it's interesting too, all of the even numbers, notice on the hexagram, they're all in the corners, and all of the odd numbers form a cross in the center.
Oh, good point. That's awesome.
That's thank you, Cosmic. That's a big part of what this is telling us. You see the I Ching ideas and the Saturn square. Can you see the correlation? And like you say, Cosmic, the points on the square, on the four corners of the square are the evens, and the cross in the center of the odd numbers, right, represents the 5 at the center, holding the cohesion, the unity, number 5. Very important. We're going to look at the phi. This is all related to the sacred geometry of how sigils are formed, as we're going to notice that there's so much revelation from this one little sign that it can keep you going for months. And so notice as well, notice the 8 and the 2, right? So this is the Saturn square. It represents the number 8. Notice that the 8 has got 2 odd numbers to feed into it. Why is that? Because the even number needs the 2 odd numbers to stabilize it, like you were saying, Indy. Notice the number 2 needs the 2 odd numbers of 1 and 3 to feed into it, because that 2 needs to be stabilized, right? Very important. That's why you've got centripetal and centrifugal potential. You could say that the 2 represents the centripetal and the 8 represents the centrifugal, right? And notice that if you step back from this diagram, because we looked at it in its parts, look at it as a whole, we'll notice that the 2 and the 8 are in opposing potentials, so they are balancing each other out, right? And the 5 in the center is this mystic secret for why and how they can balance each other out. That pentagram holds the phi, the golden phi ratio, that ties everything together, this fractal structure of reality. Then we can see the same thing, number 4 and number 6, right? 4 and 6, that potential is being bound into a polarity, so that the 4 and the 6 are holding each other in check. Notice as well that the 3 and the 9 are stabilizing factors for the number 4 in its own domain, and that the 1 and the 7 are stabilizing numbers for the 6 in its own domain. But that the 6 and the 4 produce a dynamic polarity of balance, centered once again on the 5 in the center. So you can see that all of the even numbers are maintained by the odd numbers, right? And the fundamental maintainer of all the other numbers at the center is the 5 that maintains the 8, the 6, the 2, and the 4. And what happens when you say 2 plus 4 is 6? Yeah? Think about this for a moment. 2 plus 4 is 6. 6 plus 4 is 14, right? 6 plus 2 is 8, and 4 plus 2 is 12, right? So when you add them together, right, you're ending up with the 6 plus 4, 6 plus 8, which is 14, which is 5, right? The 8 plus 4, which is 13, which is 12, which is 3, right? And the 6 plus 2, which is 8, and the 4 plus 2, which is 6. So you can see how the 8 is redoubling itself with the 6, because the other one is the 3 and the 6. And so the 3 and the 6 are these two fantastic potentials that are moving. 6 is the harmonizing, and the 3 is the expansion. And so the expansion is maintained with the harmony, and this has got to do with growth. So within the structure is speaking about growth and progression because of those numbers. But like you say, those 4 even numbers, there's a powerful mystery being revealed to us. Now, 2 and 8 have to keep each other in check in the same way that 6 and 4 has to keep each other in check. Without the harmony principle of 6, what does 6 represent in the major arcana? 6 in the major arcana represents the Empress, life, that abundant harmony of life that keeps what in check? Number 4. 4 you could closely associate with the Hierophant, right? Stagnancy, right? The 8 and the 2 kept in check. What does the 8 represent? You could tie the 8 in to representing issues related to cards or principles related to the devil, for example. The 2, the High Priestess, right? That initiation into the higher spiritual realities will bring about the necessary wisdom to overcome the pitfalls of the devil. So, which represents, our own desire towards gratification, for example, and the addictions that this can bring into our psyche. In the same way, the 4 would represent being stuck in patterns of our conditioning and not being able to step out of our conditioning patterns. So the 6 is that harmonic life principle that helps us to step out of our conditioning. And the high priestess is that crescent to initiation into the inner realms that helps us to gain understanding of the outer material realms that we're so addicted to the sensations of. So, there's endless mysteries being revealed within this one little sign. Where's Indy Sage? Are you in? Is Indy Sage in? Yes, he's in. Okay, good. I was worried what had happened to Indy Sage. But so there is just a little bit of an idea that we can see there. And so this crescent of number 2 becomes that fundamental principle that we can sort of relate to here. And if we look at the 2, it gets very interesting, right? What holds the 2 in check? The harmony of 6, right? The life principle, and the mystical spirit of number 7, that which is going inwards, right? So Venus and Neptune hold these subtle vibrational cues that the moon moves us towards in the act of the moon's power, which is sublimation, which is diving deep through the unconscious into that which was, which is the source. So, we could go on and on and on and on and on and on till it makes us dizzy, and we still won't even start to touch the true spirit and the potencies of number 2. Number 2 also represents the force of 11, right? And let's just look at what they've done to us in the physical plane. September 11. What is this about? 11, master number 2. And September, right? Think about what they're saying. So we're basically looking at a time that they basically staged a false flag, as we all know, right? And what we can say is this 9/11 business is bringing the potency of the potential of 2, which is that internalizing sublimative potential, into the activist reaching out through the element of 9 to cross the event horizon and bring forth 1, right? So 9, important why that number 9 had to be in there. And the 11 is the master number 2. So 2 is how you can dive into the unconscious. So if you want to understand hypnosis, for example, you've got to understand the number 2. And, this is basically how magic works in these sigils. So they created a sigil of 9/11. Did you guys imagine that 9/11 was a sigil? What do you guys think about that? Cosmic and Indy, if any of you guys are here, you might be eating sandwiches.
I mean, I don't know. Something definitely to think about, but I mean, I'm certain that the powers that be, like, they know about astrology and stuff. So obviously, that they're going to use that to their advantage when they, do events and stuff. Like, we know that I think Ronald Reagan, I think he had like his own like personal astrologer or something like that. So they know about the planets.
Yeah, I like the idea of 9/11 being a sigil, and like, of course the 11 could be like the 2 towers or the 2 pillars, and then 9 being like possibly, I don't know, maybe like the spiral, the golden spiral, or the grand spiral, maybe the serpent. 9 is very curvy, and together with 6, they're like the yin and the yang. So I guess I would associate 9 to be more of the yin and 6 to be of the yang, but I guess it kind of go either way. Yeah, that's fascinating.
Look at how many feet they are, right? America counts in feet, not meters. I get the meters, yeah, because we're in South Africa, European. But this was an American ritual. So it was done in feet and inches, right? Pounds, not kilograms. So we got 1 plus 3 is 4, right? 4 plus 6 is 10. 10 plus 8 is 18, right? 1 plus 7 is 8. 8 plus 2 is 10. Plus 8 is 18, right? Do you find that a curiosity?
Yeah, because they both add up to 9 plus 18 is 2 9s. So you have like the 9 and the 2, or the 1 and the 1 of the 9 adding back to each other, and it's twofold as well. So it's not just that it happens once, it happens twice. So there's definitely a 1 1 there, and another 1 1, and a 9 wrapping it all together. So that's pretty.
The South Tower carries 12, the vibration of 12, because it's dancing for the 12 zodiac signs, right? The South is the past. The North is where we're going. Notice how many floors. Remember we were talking about the number 2, and the master number of 2 is 11? Yeah?
Yeah.
110 floors, that's 11 and a 0. So you can see how they've encoded the building to represent something particularly interesting. And how they are bringing that 11 floors, they are collapsing the 11 floors. That means they are collapsing it into an epicenter. That's the number 2. That's the lunar potential. That's the crescent of Saturn, right? But in the process of the crescent of Saturn, they are also opening up something quite interesting. And one more thing I would like to show to you here, which I think is quite relevant. I think it's quite important. If we look at the Saturn square once again, right? And we just take a moment to grasp the importance of this, because I think like you just can't, you can't get enough of this. So we've got the 7 plus the 8 is 15, right? Plus the 9 is 24, right? And the 2 plus the 3 is 5, plus the 1 is 6. And when we bring that 6 into the 24, we end up with 30, right? So this is showing us that we are balancing against, we're working against the forces of Jupiter, which is the expansive principle. And so that's giving you an insight into the South Tower, right? This is why the South Tower, right? The South Tower, it had to be 12, right? Had to be 1,362, right? Because that's bringing us back to 12, which is a 1 and 2, which is a 3. So they have to measure what we are against the expansion, but they put the antenna on the North Tower, because the North Tower is the giving off the frequencies, right? And that's why the large transmission antenna was there. So when they were collapsing these towers, they were trying to tell us something, and they were speaking to our unconscious directly, using a lot of these mystical notations that are all inscribed within the Saturn square itself. So this is why when we look at this this enneagram system, and this isn't the enneagram that you'll find in the other so-called enneagram systems. This is just, I've just transcribed correct numerology onto a system. I've put words there. These words I've chosen randomly just to represent what these 8 planetary energies and numerological things represent. 8 is about achieving career. 7 is about mystic, going inwards towards the spiritual dimension. 6 is the artist, which is exploring harmonies between things. 5 is the adventurer of movement and change and journeys and going out and communications. And 4 is the builder. It's about structure. It's about form. It's about things being as they are. 3 is the optimist, optimizing everything so that everything's in a constant state of expansion and improvement. 2 is the empath, bringing everything into itself, the crescent, right? It's collecting all of the water into itself, right? And so it's going into the unconscious. And one is the leader. One is the leader. It's the center of the circle. It's the radiant potential of life force. And so the radiant potential of life force is the motion of the enneagram in 10, so that it can bring out the potentials. And that's why the number of the sun is 19, right? And the number of the sun being 19 happens to be on our periodic table. What's the proton number? We're talking about potassium, right? The potassium is what you have to feed your plants, right? In order for them to be able to produce fruit and grow. So that growth, which is life, which is what needs to be eaten by the plants that are basically conducting light and changing alchemically the light into crystals of sugars, so that they can trade the sugars with the microbes in the soil, who will then give them the minerals that they've digested under the soil. But the microbes don't have the sugar necessary to metabolize. They get that from the plant. So there's a symbiotic exchange. There's a trade happening under the soil between the plant and the microbes. So when we look at this whole system, we see number 2 sitting opposite the 7 and the 6. And the 7 and the 6 is really interesting, because when you add them together, you end up with 13. And so the 12 elements of the zodiac are the mystic translations of the 13. In order to have 12 relationships, you have to have 13 things. Otherwise, you can't have the 12 relationships that we're observing in astrology. So those 12 elements are 12 relationships of 13 things. So now you're going to find all these new ages out there, all these youngsters, TikTokers, trying to say that, no, it's a 13 sun calendar, it's 13 this, it's 13 that. They just don't understand. They just haven't gone in and seen for themselves the structure of the system we're in, and that the 12 is the hidden element, which is of 13 things. Because if we look at it and we actually sit and observe it very carefully with great deliberation and patience, it becomes relevant. Sit in nature, and nature will literally teach you sacred geometry. You don't need a book to learn sacred geometry. Nature is your teacher. She will teach you everything you need to know if you have the time and the devotion, the bhakti, and the awareness to sit and devote your time and energy to studying her, and do it in a real way, like proper, like throw it in there. Welcome, dear Bonnie Clyde. How are you doing? And yes, exactly. It's fundamental sacred salt, potassium. It's very very important. Sidereal is very interesting because, once again, right? You're either looking at things from relation to the sun, heliocentric, or you're looking at things from relation to the moon, right? Now, the heliocentric model, we can see it here. The heliocentric model is a product of 9, right? We're not talking about 1. When we speak about heliocentral, we speak about 19, because we have done a full cycle of the enneagram, passed through number 9, and re-emerged as 10, carrying the 9 on the back. 19, potassium, the sun, solar radiation, photosynthesis. So we're looking at the actualized measurements of physical manifestation. When we look at sidereal astrology, we are looking at number 2, not 20, not 11. No, 2. 2 is the primal state. So 2 emerges from 1, not from 19, from 1. 1 is the fundamental, the monad. 2 is the potential that comes into being. This is right up there in the supernal realms. So we are looking into our past fundamental before we were physical. So heliocentric astrology is very based upon matter, but sidereal astrology is based upon the spiritual. And I think this is why, if you look at the cultures in India and you look at the cultures in the West, our ideology has been totally materialism. But in India, the ideology has been spirituality. Everything is about karma and the spiritual. They are more focused on the spiritual than what they are on the physical. We're more focused on the physical than what we're on the spiritual. That's because of the way in which we've related to the elements. We've been focusing on potassium and manifesting and producing physical stuff. In India, it's been more the focus on insight, right? And going deep into that emotional. So the sidereal astrology is much more focused on your past lives and your spiritual journey of growth and productivity, where and through that you can still predict. I mean, I'm not an astrologer, I don't do prediction things, but it's as potent to predict physical things, but it's coming from the perspective of the spirit, as opposed to looking at things just on the physical plane, right? And so there's an interesting correlation. I think that both systems fit together as like a hand in a glove, and that they both hold relevance. Personally, what do you guys think? Indy, cosmic, about the difference of perspective relation to the moon and the sun.
What was I thinking about earlier? I had a thought. I'm trying to think about. No, I got nothing.
Well, going into this thing, just to recap here. So we were talking about the relevance of the number 2. So we're talking about the potential.
Gain understanding. People that are focused on one extreme, when they want to try to balance the two out, they can have more deeper understanding of each. So I think it's important that we all have different precisions on it and different focuses, but then it kind of becomes a bridge for people that want to explore further and expand.
Yeah, brother, exactly. That they each serve a purpose, different tool for a different job, maybe.
Yeah, and they're not totally separate from each other. Like I feel like reading the stars is closer to the spirit, and then practical matters like of earthly things is like more practical of the body stuff.
Hallelujah. Yeah, so the chokmah element, which is the number 2, which represents the potential, we can see that it's in alignment with the correspondence principle. I think this is really important to understand, right? So the correspondences of things that fit together. When you look at a picture of Shiva, let me show you what I'm talking about. You can see this, even though that's a Kabbalah. I know it's a Kabbalah, but I'm going to show you now that you're going to see it in the Vedic path. You're going to see the same thing. Yeah, they're going to be telling us the same story. They're going to be telling it to us in a symbolic way. And, maybe I can find a beautiful picture, because the picture is worth 1,000 words. Okay. So let's take that off and put that on. So here we can see with a picture of Shiva, right? What we can see with the picture of Shiva is here. You see the crescent? Then there are better pictures of Shiva that I could show, if I'm going to be fair. I prefer this one, actually. This is one you'll see more frequently throughout India. It's a pretty picture. And Shiva looks so pretty here. You'll see that the crescent is always sitting here, right? It's always this crescent moon, like sitting next to his kudumbi, next to his beehive. And it's always represented with that light that's shining from within his Ajna chakra. So the cool crescent potential is that high spiritual aspect, right? And I think that sort of gives us an insight into the difference between the solar and the moon potential. You see the Trisul in the background here representing the 3, right? 3 potentials. And so that's quite interesting, And here on the bottom side, we've got the masculine and feminine force. So we've got the principles of hermetics being expressed here. The Trisul, you could say, is the principle of the mentalism, right? And this here that we see with the on the right hand side next to his left knee is the principle of generation, of masculine and feminine coming together, right? And we got the principle of correspondence, the moon resting upon his head, right? And we can also see that noticed around his waist, he has this band around his waist with this animal skin that is holding him together, right? Very important, because we're talking about the chain of causal and effects, right? Related to the sacral plexus. Notice around his heart center, He's got the Rudraksha Mala. The Rudraksha Mala are those repolarizing potentials, right? The repolarizing potentials that structure the substance of the heart. Notice that he has this fiery leopard's animal skin that covers his solar plexus, right? And essentially connects his solar plexus to his shoulders, which is related to the Visuddhi. The Visuddhi is covered by the serpent. The serpent guards the egg, right? The Akasha, right? This is the vibrations. Serpents are very tuned into the field of vibration. The third principle of Hermes, where this animal skin here, which is connecting that through the triple burner in Chinese medicine, represents the principle of rhythm, because rhythm connects to the serpent, you see? And so the serpent is touching that skin that goes down here. You see how these symbols are talking to you, man? You can see the Hermetic symbols, principles, like they are so, once you've seen it, once you've made a relationship with the Hermetic principles, a direct relationship, because they are living beings, right? They will reveal themselves to you everywhere you look. You won't be able to miss them. You know, they'll be so obvious. Like, oh, those are the Hermetic principles. What was I thinking? You know, it's obviously them. And so you can see how these Hermetic principles are literally expressing themselves to you. And it's profoundly empowering. All 7 principles right here in front of you, in front of your eyes. So hard to like not miss, right? And notice how the Trishul, which is that staff, which is the emergence of, that's the pure potential that comes through the Shiva eye as a metaphor, is in his right hand, but it is more like it's not something he's wielding. It's suggesting that he's almost hanging from it by the way he's holding it. Like all of these little subtle tells, telling us that everything is emerging from this fundamental principle, the mentalism principle. And you notice how if you look at it, it's like an Aum. So it speaks about the resonant frequencies of vibration coming out. But it's not just an Aum, it's the A part of the Aum. So it's not the Aum, it's not the Tat, it's the Sat. Now, what is the Sat? Isn't it funny that the word Saturn carries that prefix in it? These things are not by accident at all. None of them, not even slightly. So, yeah, that's what we can see here when we look at this field of correspondences and how they sort of relate, right? And hence we can see this number 2, which is this very important, the potential of a sigil is carrying that vibration of number 2, the correspondence, right? The number 8 is the other side of the Saturn sigil, and it's carrying the desire that produces cause and effect, right? So the number 8, the eighth Sephirot, right? The Hot, which is the head, which is Saturn's domain, ruling over understanding the occult principles, is carrying the structure, right? The structure which is number 4. Number 4 is space, Chesed, right? That's the Mazloth. That's the 12 zodiac pieces that constitute this revolution, this movement of space. But this, as a unique principle of space prior to the manifestation of the Mazloth, is being carried through the structure of the head, the Saturnial principle that puts cognition to it. And so the rhythm principle of Saturn, right, connects the cause and effect principle to polarity, which is energy, so that the energy can, through the valve of rhythm, which is Saturn's domain, the lords of rhythm of time, carry into cause and effect and produce the changes on the physical plane that we are attempting to manifest through sorcery, magic, and witchcraft, which is the purpose of the sigil, which is carrying the potential of the correspondences. So the sigil maps out the correspondences, right? The ideas which are deep within us, within our unconscious as potentials. It takes those potentials, and through the harmonic expression of sacred geometry, it produces the structure that the head can hold in the etheric plane, structuring our desire towards cause and effect, so that we can manifest the effects from the causes that are initiated by the potentials of the correspondences that we hold within the sigil. So if you look at how the sigil is manifesting these two elements, you can then see what I'm talking about, why the Saturn sigil is such a powerful and potent decoder, right? We've got the 2 and we've got the 8. Which were the 2 I was showing you just now? It was the 8 and the 2. The 2, as we said, is holding the conceptual potentials of the correspondences. And that energy is taking inwards the centripetal potentials. And the centripetal potentials are being expressed centrifugally as 8, right? And 8 is reflecting outwards the cause and effect, right? And the cause and effect is being reflected outwards, as we say, towards producing the changes that we want. So we can see that a sigil needs to map out and maintain the balance and the harmony between the 2 and the 8, with the 5 in the center. Why? Because the sigil is a communication device that communicates the 2 to the 8 through us, through the enneagram, essentially. So I hope you guys are all following. Am I making sense here? Are you guys with me? I hope I'm not like going off on like a yanda and everybody's going like, what the hell? What is he saying?
I think it was interesting earlier when you were talking about like Vishnu or Shiva, I forget which one, just like how much like information can be conveyed in symbols and an image, and it's just sort of processed at an unconscious level. Like you're breaking down like the symbolism, what the moon means, what the serpent means, what the position means, and it makes me think like how much information gets expressed to us on an unconscious level, because it's like I think in a lot of ways that sense of harmony and balance is like you get that from that image if you don't necessarily like, figure out what the symbols mean. Even if you don't know like occultism, that sort of expression still is resonant upon the person who look at it, because it sort of acts at an unconscious level. So it kind of makes you think more about how much information is expressed just purely in that sort of visual and symbolic way, and how, in terms of control structures and like how much when you look at an image that you're actually being told a message that's not necessarily even being expressed, in like literal words or philosophy, just like by just seeing that particular symbol and seeing that symbol over and over and over again, it legitimizes something within your mind that just sort of makes it real by association. Like you think about like I was thinking the other day about like, the standard, Christian Jesus symbol, Jesus being nailed to the cross, and thinking about how absurd and strange that symbol would be if you never lived in a Western culture before. If you were an alien, you never see it. Like that image to us is so normalized in the West. Like you don't even think of it as being weird. But if you were a different culture totally outside of that, you'd be like, what the hell is this? And that symbol becomes like normalized in that sense. You don't even really think about it. And the image of what that represents kind of gets inferred to it at an unconscious level. So in a lot of ways, like there's a deeper significance to the sacred art, because in a lot of ways it's doing pretty much the exact same thing as any occult text or grimoire does in terms of how it explains its philosophy, its moral values, and all the correspondences with the universe and stuff. And here you're just seeing all that expressed purely in a non-linguistic visual form. I think that's kind of interesting.
Don't you think it also illustrates the perfect difference between heliocentric based astrology and the lunar based astrology, which is sidereal astrology from India? So this is a lunar expression. It's like the moon. It's got no shape to it, does it? But in the West, everything's got to be defined with sentences and clearly articulated verbs and vowels and shapes. And we got to know exactly what it means, right? This is what it is. It's like preached. But in India, in the heliocentric model, it's implied. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that it's more of a kind of like a feminine receptacle kind of way of understanding, these ideas. Because I think, yeah, you're right, in the West that we are more kind of analytical and sort of logic based. I mean, Christianity, like one of the main like big aspect of it is the logos, logic. Like that is seen as sort of the ultimate sort of arbiter of reality. That's like what Christ and God basically embodies in the West. And then you see here the more kind of unconscious, sort of like irrational, just sort of like, pure visual. I think that's also expressed in the fact that Hinduism, for a longest time was an oral tradition. They didn't write the stuff down. And so it's just sort of passed on from people to people, from person to person. And the written tradition came much, much later, if I'm correct on that.
Yeah, brother, totally. And that's like, it's quite interesting, and I think as well, if we look at it like there's quite a lot that we can sort of deduce as well, when we look at like the differences between the Western and those are the ideas that we can see, which are really clearly sort of articulated in the sigil, the Saturn sigil. Like I just have to keep going back there. Like there's just, you can't get enough of that thing. It's like the Shiva drawing on steroids, right? Just how many little associations are hidden in there. And I think like that's what a sigil is it carries hidden information in it that's like so deeply embedded within it that like I've got a sigil that I made. I don't make a lot of sigils, dude. People are like, oh, you must make loads of sigils. Dude, I'm not like a sigil. I don't like sit and make sigils like, oh, what sigil should I make this month? Oh, to me, a sigil is a serious undertaking. If I'm going to create a sigil, I'm going to spend months contemplating that sigil. Like, and I'm going to then spend time consecrating that sigil. And by the time that sigil is made and I'm using it, it's like it's taken a year of my life, right? And then I've really thought about what sigil I need. I don't need another sigil for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. That's my 10, 20 years sigil I need. So like sigils, the people are making sigils like they're baking loaves of bread. And to me, when I think of what a sigil represents, it's like a astral tattoo in a way. And when we look at, like, for example, another like important point here, I think that is like quite relevant when we look at the 2 and the 8. You could think that the 8 represents where we're at in the West, the glorification of Saturn, the Saturn cube, all the Saturn cults. All the youngsters have read their books about the Saturn cults, and so they're going to tell us about the Saturn moon matrix is some conspiracy thing, and it's black magicians. Yes, black magicians use the Saturn moon matrix in their magic because this is how the universe works. But the white magicians also use the Saturn moon matrix because this is how the universe works, right? So you got all these people like focusing on all this, like, wow, this is impressive information about the Saturn moon matrix. They don't understand that it's really quite simple. It's the polarity. In the East, the focus is upon the 2, is upon that internal feminized potential. It's an emotional current. It's an emotional internalized current. In the West, we're 8, right? What I ate becomes my physical external flesh. It's materialism. So 8 and 2, you could think of as when Steiner speaks about Lucifer and Ahriman, you could see that the Luciferian forces have utilized the potential of 2, and the Ahrimanic forces have utilized the potential of 8 to produce this form of consciousness through which humanity can be subjugated. But that's not what 2 and 8 represents. And this is why it's so dangerous with so many of these TikTok channels and YouTube channels, and people preaching that this is what it is. It is what it is what they're saying it is, but it also isn't. It is what I'm saying it is, but it also isn't. It's more, and it's also much less. And there's no end to the potentials that it is or isn't, other than what you can develop your own ability to tune into it, like a pitchfork, like a vibrational field. And once you're in rhythm with it and you're vibrating at the same pitch, then it can pitch you its sales pitch. And you can learn its methods, if you will. So I think like that's an important part. And when we talk about sigils, here's an interesting question, Cosmic. What about the Fae and sigils? You've developed a fairly extensive system of sigils, haven't you?
Yeah, I don't know if I would call sigils is technically the right word, because Zerfaxes can be used to make sigils. Is the idea that you can basically you take how there's like there's the classic like chaos magic type where it's like you take your intention, you write it down, remove all the repeating letters and the vowels, and use all those letters to make the symbol. You do that, but you take the Zerfaxes that correspond with each of those letters, and then you make a sigil out of those Zerfaxes instead. So that's how they do it. But their idea is, because the whole theory is about magic is all about taking from something from the indeterminate zone and reflecting it into the Zarfax interior, which are basically kind of the two sides. That's what they call a Shizerfax, which is basically kind of the bridge Zerfax. And so anyway, the idea is that when you make a sigil, you're taking something from physical reality, which is something that's written down, and you're giving it a corollary to the astral or etheric reality, right? And so by having that sense of that connection between those two things, it's like a circuit. And the idea is the closer the connection between the sigil and the manifestation, the higher the correspondence, the higher likelihood of magical manifestation to essentially make itself. So the idea is, it's like if you reflect something within this world to then reflect in the astral world, so then it bounces and reflects back into the physical world. So sigils essentially create a sort of a bridge between these two Zerfax dimensional spaces. So the idea is like you have the Zerfax that is your current state of existence, and then you have the Zerfax of your desired intent. And the idea is the sigil acts as a Zerfax in between those two to kind of connect the two Zerfaxes together and create a circuit. And the optimization of magic is that the less Zerfaxes you have in between your Zerfax and the intent, the higher likelihood of manifestation and the more powerful the magic actually is.
Yeah, that's a good description. It's well put, I think. And this idea of mirroring. I think you used the word mirroring, or if you didn't use the word, you implied mirroring, right?
Yeah, basically.
Is a very interesting part. Because once again, when we look at the Saturn square, what we see is mirroring, right? Whether you're looking between the 4 and the 6, you're seeing mirroring. Whether you're looking between the 8 and the 2, you're seeing mirroring. Whether you're looking between the 3 and the 7, you're seeing mirroring. But it's interesting when you look between the 3 and the 7, what kind of mirroring you see. Isn't that interesting? Right? It's like how real mirrors work. It's back to front, isn't it? Like the letters. Do you notice how when you look in a mirror, the letters aren't upside down? Right, Cosmic?
Yeah.
They're only mirrored left to right. Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
And so they're not mirrored from top right to top left or top left to top right. They're only mirrored from left and right. And we can see that in the Saturn square, right? 3 and 7 is reversed, right? Because 7 is a downward moving thing, where 3 is an upward moving thing, right? But when we look at 8 and 2, they're symmetrical. When we look at 6 and 4, they're symmetrical. So it's quite an interesting perspective here, because in this picture, it's important to recognize that 4 is the bottom, is the root. And 8 is the heavens, if you will, where 4 is the structure. So this is the central pillar, if you will, right? And so it's, you notice how it's off center. It's very, very interesting. I see a lot of the Saturn sigil moved around left and right, and they rotate it, and they're using it as a symbol. And it always bugs me when I see that. I'm like, well, it doesn't fit the number square then. Like, the whole point of the sigil is it's referencing the numbers, and it's a refined use of numerology. So the Saturn sigil is a sigil that's based upon numbers. And you brought up an interesting point, Cosmic, like which is probably the most common sigils that a lot of the newer schools of magic are using, is words, right? Like build a sentence and take that sentence and turn them into words, and turn that words into one word, and turn that word without the vowels into a picture, and then represent all of those. And hopefully you've checked the number of syllables, hopefully you've checked the number of words, hopefully you've checked the number of letters. Hopefully the number of letters and the number of words and the number of syllables are expressing the numerological potentials that you're trying to achieve vibrationally through the sigil. If you didn't do that homework, then good luck to you, because like Cosmic says, you need more of the synchronous, synergetic potential of power that comes from the correspondences. And so those correspondences need to be correct. And so if you've got all those ducks in a line, you can build your structure out of words, which will then become a geometric pattern in a sense, but made out of letters. And they don't have to be English letters. They can be other letters. Or you can have the numerical cipher, right? And so Saturn sigils are made out of numerical ciphers. In fact, if you look at most of the angelic sigils that you will find in most grimoires, they are made out of numerical ciphers. So in the old times, we used to make our sigils out of numerical ciphers. But in modern times, we're doing them out of words. That's quite interesting. Food for thought. But they're all sort of reflecting geometry. You notice how when you make a sigil out of a numerical cipher, it becomes a pure expression of geometry. The word cipher, sigils, I think that's a more modern development. Would you agree? Does that make sense that it's a more modern development over the older pure number?
I mean, I guess I would think so, because it's, it's a game of telephone with all these concepts and ideas. And I guess if you think about just think about the methodology, you're talking about, the idea is you want to sort of separate, the intent from the kind of the manifestation, because you want to kind of decouple that from your understanding, so that, it can be processed unconsciously, because you're too aware of it. You're not really going to let that sort of go at that sort of under liminal layer of your perception. So, when it comes to sigil craft and, these sort of things, I guess the way I sort of use magic is I always, like when I do like fey spells, for example, it's like you kind of like come up with the names of the entity and you kind of try like you fit the symbols and the words like a crossword puzzle so that like all the spellings of all the words sort of like still, are properly spelled, right? So it creates a circuit. And because the way I think about magic is I've realized that there's essentially two methods of manifesting magic into reality. That's by either you low randomness or high randomness. So the kind of magic that you do, shaman, and you do low randomness magic. You try to create as many correspondences as possible to make randomly the less random, the higher likelihood your intention is going to manifest. So if you can basically create enough sort of coherence and kind of create these circuits of like symmetry and meaning within the universe, that kind of creates a compiling effect, which then sort of removes randomness from reality. But then there's the other method where where it's high randomness. So what that basically means is that you're adding additional elements to reality that aren't there, and you're sort of like overclocking the randomness, and you're basically kind of like injecting something within reality, even though it doesn't necessarily fit, which is how I would characterize a lot of chaos magic working. And this is all kind of reflected in how Zarfexology sort of understands my perception of magic and basically how different belief systems manifest their intent into reality. So a lot of belief systems that are sort of open-minded, believing, open to the supernatural, these are going to use low randomness magic. So the idea is you have so much, correspondences of meaning and structure that there's ideally no randomness at all, and that everything is perfectly accounted for, everything has meaning, and the more meaningful you have and the less randomness you have, the higher your magical power. Whereas chaos magic works in the opposite direction, where you're basically sort of taking apart reality, deconstructing it, and sort of like ripping out all the wires and, breaking everything with so you're kind of like glitching the system of reality to manifest your intent. And that's kind of, I see what's going on with the chaos magic and the sigils. So, understanding manifestation from two different vantage points like that has been kind of helpful in me understanding, the differences and why some things work and some things other work, because, believers, they have that low randomness, but skeptical people, they manifest their manifestations with high randomness. So if you think about it from somebody who wants to, push materialism onto the world, they benefit from a high randomness for their manifestation. So they have their worldview is random. And so that's basically kind of how I measured it. And I think of it like so the idea is, actually, let me just, I can just talk about this. So you think about a Zerfax called the Vlid Zerfax, and that's kind of like
don't you have your pictures ready? Don't you have
let me get some pictures ready. Yeah, I'm gonna hold on a second. I was just about to do that, but
because it helps people to know what you're talking about.
You are absolutely right. You are absolutely right, and I'm gonna do that right now. I think this
especially with cosmic
this is very important and helpful.
It's very cosmic. It's very cosmic system.
Indeed.
It's like
all right, there we go. All right, so if we see here, this is the Zarfex interior, this side of the map, and this is basically, when your magical manifestation is successfully implemented, it shows up in the Zerfaxes on the left side. But as you're maintaining it, it basically goes on to the right side right here. This is where all the astral, spiritual stuff. And this Zerfax right here, this is called the Vlid Zerfax. It's the Zerfax of randomness. So the idea is every Zerfax channel is also relates to a belief system. So the Azerfax channel, for example, relates to monotheism. The Zaphras channel relates to polytheism and magic. The Nezerfax channel relates to atheist materialism. And the Etherfax channel relates to chaos magic. Then the Kithzerfax channel would be your mysticism channel. The Feezerfax channel would be basically your nihilism channel. And then here is basically kind of the mystery Zerfikes, where they all kind of like compound into a contradiction. But the idea is every one of these is its own kind of universe, and all the contradictions are basically resolved in this Zerfax called the Vlidzerfax. And this is basically, this Zerfax allows all of these different realities to coexist without basically kind of contradicting each other and overlapping each other. So the idea is
that the champagne glass.
Yeah, the champagne glass. And it's kind of
okay.
similar to Saturn if you think about it. And that it also has that kind of tail at the end, and it's also related to this symbol up here, Phi, which is also very Saturnian in its nature. So the idea is this basically acts like a filter in terms of what gets manifested into reality and what doesn't get manifested into reality. And the idea is there's like 4 xiphoid membranes with each Zerfax, which I represent as 100%. So at the average rate, it's at 400%. But depending upon what you believe, that percentage changes. So if you're somebody who is a mystical person, that may be 300%. And if you're really committed and disciplined, it's 200%. And if you go even deeper, it's like it's less than that. And then because one has a symmetrical understanding of the world, there's less randomness and contradictions within this Zerfax. And then the intention that you have out here can then make its way into reality and manifest itself. Now, the other strategy is what you do is instead of eliminating this Zerfax, this Vlidzerfax, what the skeptical people do is they essentially take this area and turn it into a different Vlidzerfax that basically kicks this Zerfax out of the way and then kind of manifests its own manifestation. So basically, it's basically adding a whole bunch of, it's basically making this Zerfax even more random than it's supposed to be on average. And it basically kind of like doubles its randomness output, which then can be used to manifest an intent into reality that doesn't necessarily correspond with the rules, the laws, the correspondences of this universe. So what that kind of basically is telling me right now is that basically these chaos magicians are literally glitching our matrix, and maybe that's not necessarily a good thing.
That's a very interesting perception, man. One I never really stopped to really consider the implications of. Like you can get someone to do what you want them to do by mind screwing them, right? Mind fucking them. Right, Cosmic? Manipulate them and mind fuck them, and they don't know what's going on and they do what you want. Or you can get someone to do what you want by sitting down and explaining to them like why you asking them to do it and showing them like, well, this is what's going to happen. It's going to be good for you. There's a symbiotic element here. It serves me here. It serves you here. And then they get to choose and go, okay, yeah, you know what? I'm going to work with you on this because I like this. I'm going to do you a favor. You're going to owe me a favor. And this is going to be synergetic for me. I'm going to get something. Or people can just be like manipulated. It's almost like lying to someone to get them to do what you want. Right? Like it's not healthy for the person you're doing it to, is it?
Yeah, you're kind of basically, it's like you're finding loopholes in reality to exploit instead of actually working with the system in its normal corresponding ways.
I wonder what the effects would be over a prolonged period. Is
Probably
this
what we're
have we just
experiencing now.
discovered the difference between black magic and white magic?
Maybe.
Is that what we're seeing?
I guess so. Well, I don't know if I would consider it black. It's like it's different. It's high randomness versus low randomness. So it's basically sl versus vled. So that's how you basically pronounce it. It's VLD, but you pronounce it like bled. It's like a weird noise like that. It almost sounds like it's like an inhuman glitch noise. This is also a Zerfax that's associated with humor and nightmares. So it's a very interesting Zerfax, and delirious states of consciousness.
It's consciousness, possession. Because like you get that dizzy, delirious feeling, like if something's trying to possess you. Anyone has ever had it trying to possess them, first thing you start noticing when something's trying, you get this dizzy feeling. You got to go, hold on, what's going on? Let's put on the mitts. Into the ring we go. It's time to dance, baby. But I like this. What we're breaking into here. It's like it's an uncharted territory. When I'm speaking of black and white magic, it's not like in the conventional. It's like the difference between, okay, so if you work with the flow of something, right, then you are maintaining that flow and increasing the flow will become stronger, right? The more you work with life will work with you and it'll flow with you. But if you work in a way, so working with the correspondences will strengthen the correspondences, right? Working in a chaotic way will make the system more chaotic. Does that make sense? Like whatever you put into the system is going to feed more into that system. So if you're working chaotically into a system, the system is going to likely become more chaotic the more people work into that chaotic system chaotically, until the system itself becomes chaotic.
It becomes its own kind of organism, yeah.
Yeah, it will start to break down, because that's what chaotic will. It will break down the structure that there is. But if you're working with the symbol, with the correspondences, then you should stabilize the system. The system should be more stable, shouldn't it? So it's got to do with stability and instability.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the stability is like a root place for the potential for harmony and for life. If you're destabilizing the system, it's going to destabilize the forces of life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be on some level detrimental. And by maintaining the stability, the harmonies of life are going to be more stabilized. So it's a very interesting idea. So when I say black magic, I mean entropic magic or anentropic magic. That's really what I mean.
I think it makes sense though, because what I'm describing about here is basically so that kind of low randomness magic. That's when you're working in the Zaphras channel. So that's basically, your traditional magician, your ceremonial magic, making sure everything follows the correspondence. The Esoteric, this is the channel of chaos magic, and you also have to represent that each channel has a sort of a dimensional sort of relationship. So basically, the Esoteric channel is kind of more like the outer edges of the Zarfax. It's kind of the stuff that's sort of on the outskirts of reality, sort of trying to make itself kind of come into here. Whereas the Zaphras channel has a more direct connection between the Zarfax interior over here, because this Zarfax, the Izarfax, is the self, and the self connects the Zaphras channel to the Azarfax channel, which is related to monotheism, but it's also related to cities, basically muscle memory. So if you you can know how to ride a bike, but you don't have to think about it. That requires Azarfaxal consciousness. Whereas down here, you notice that the reflection of the chaos magic in the indeterminate zone is atheist materialism in the Zarfax interior. And notice that these two channels have a void Zarfax in between, blocking the two from each other, which then creates a sort of gap in between each other, which is why these belief systems can be very, very different from each other. One, this is very rational, but here you could also believe in a lot of really, crazy out there, kind of chaos magic stuff. So, in a lot of ways, you're operating on different channels here, and notice that it also depends on the gate. So when you're working in the Esoteric channel, there's sort of a black void that surrounds your Zerfax. So if you've ever been in a state of mind where it's like you feel like, the room or wherever you exist in is the only kind of island of existence in the universe, and everything outside of your perception just feels like a black void, that's when you've been in etherfaxal consciousness. It also, have you ever taken any kind of disassociative substances like ketamine, for example, will also put you into an etherfaxal state of consciousness. Whereas the Zaphras channel has more of a colored void Zerfax. So, for example, like if you're feeling the energy of Mercury, you'll feel kind of like an orange energy surrounding the perimeter of your Zerfax, right? And so there's that colored aspect, and there's that aspect of light that is working within the Zaphras channel, because this Zerfax is called the Dio Zerfax. Now, this is the colored void Zerfax, with these colored void Zerfaxes, these also represent the planets. So Mercury, Jupiter, Mars, Saturn in the indeterminate zone represent themselves in this Zerfax. But notice here in the Etherfax channel, it's just a big old void. And that void is where you project in your subjective personal interpretation, because there's no need for, up here, you need planets, correspondences. But here, because it's kind of cut off in its own island in the chaos magic, there's nothing that's required. And all you need is really kind of like an image to, and now that I think about it, the Etherfax kind of looks like a chaos magic sigil typically would. And, but yeah, that's kind of like a breakdown of how I understand it, and how each side is essentially a reflection of, so basically the polytheistic sort of chaos, the ceremonial magic reflects the kind of the mundane kind of monotheistic, because both of these are kind of like, they're more kind of pro-society right-hand path, and this is kind of more, rebellious kind of like chaos magic here, and then you got your materialism over here, but they're reflections of each other. So in a lot of ways, so in a sense, this is kind of like an atheist materialist reflection of magic in the indeterminate zone. And this is kind of a more traditional, monotheistic, traditional reflection of magic into the indeterminate zone. And they kind of both reflect off of each other like that.
You know what I'm thinking about here? And I'm going to geek out people. I can't say I was a very good geek. Sorry to say I was a bad geek. I was a part-time geek, okay? I was a geek until Friday night, and then I was like a party animal when I was young. But this takes me back to my childhood, what we're talking about here. Because we played Dungeons and Dragons, and yes, people, back in those days, the Dungeons and Dragons to play was 2nd edition AD&D, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And we did play a lot in the Forgotten Realms, which was fun because everybody loved the dwarves, right? The dwarves and the elves, although the elves weren't so very popular. I like to play the elves. But there was a particular world in the Advanced 2nd edition. Did you ever play the old Dungeons and Dragons, Cosmic?
I never really played Dungeons and Dragons. I think I played other role-playing. I played like Warhammer 40K and games like that, but I never really played the actual Dungeons and Dragons. I remember as a kid, I tried to make like a copycat version of it in my notebooks with like dice and numbers and stuff, and I'd make my own like dice-based games, but I never played like the official Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, you had to play in a group, and you needed to have like a DM that really knew his crap to teach, to usher you into the mysteries, as it were, because it was complex. But there was one couple of brothers, Bobby and Michael, the Bryant brothers, that they were both geeks, but they'd been sort of brought into our fold. We were like wild, and they were both like geekish, but they were cool. So we brought them into our fold. And they both could DM Dark Sun, because they had a lot of Dark Sun stuff, and, all the books and everything on Dark Sun. And so Dark Sun world, it makes me think of this, because Dark Sun magic was separate. Now, Dark Sun was the best. Anybody out there, if you play the 2nd edition of Dungeons and Dragons, it was the best Dungeons and Dragons role-playing world ever. Because magic wasn't magic. Magic was preserver, or defiler magic. You had to choose. And then there was a psionicist, which was different. And the psionicist was using mental powers to influence the minds of other beings, right? So you had the defiling magic and you had the preserver magic. And the defiling magic would chaotically just rip all of the life force out of an area and leave like it's like a fracking, right? When you did your spell, depending on how high level the spell was, it would frack an area. And if you were doing a high level spell in an area where there wasn't that much life, you would for a long distance turn the earth into a defiled piece of land. And so you could be a defiler or you could be a preserver. Now the preservers were limited to what power they would draw for magic, and so they had to be clever on how they used their magic. The defiler would just draw an unlimited amount of energy and not care about the consequences because they just wanted their objective. And so this is making me think, and it makes me think about necromancy versus different kinds of magic, right? And so what is necromancy? I mean, we know necromancy is related to non-living. But why is necromancy related to non-living? Maybe it's drawing its life from a chaotic principle, which the principles of life are very organized, right? In order to maintain all the systems of life, each system needs its particular what it needs. And so the prana has got to flow in very particular ways, and it's got to fill all the particular nadis, and it's got to have a particular series of correspondences that produce particular synchronicities within the energy field, that all of the life is maintained, balance, and harmony. But necromancy will be drawing from the place beyond the physical life. So these rules don't apply. So it's almost like I'm seeing a connection here between chaos magic and necromancy, in a sense. Does that make sense to you? Or this random thing that I'm...
No, it makes perfect sense. I can totally see those connections.
And so it just makes me think of that that old, anybody out there, if you guys are into playing D&D, I would recommend, I don't know about all this new D&D, but I can tell you something, those old D&D 2nd edition advanced was the bomb. I saw, I was actually helping to try and dungeon master for my girlfriend's teenager and some friends of theirs. And I'm like, I do not know what I'm doing. I was never a DM, really. I tried my hand at DMing once or twice. And like, this is a lot of information to take on board. But these days you've got like Google, and you've got like AI systems that can help you with like figuring out all the details that you would have had to read books about in those days. So I was able to sort of almost try half-heartedly fought my way through it, DMing. And I noticed how different this new Dungeons and Dragons that everybody's playing is. And I was like, oh, it's hollow. It's missing a lot. Like in our D&D in 2nd edition, your role-playing was a big part of how you scored your experience points. You couldn't just go out there and be crash down creatures and get experience. You had to role play because your alignments and your role play had to be synchronized, and you had to arrange this very carefully with your DM. And if you strayed away from your life story and your alignments in your life story, you would get severe penalties, and it would set you back like 3 or 4 or 5 levels from the rest of your party. Be horrible, right? You have to go on a side quest all on your own to try and catch up to the rest of the party, or you just be a weaker character, and that's not much fun. So it was better practice to actually play your proper character. You set up your past and you play your character, even if it involves losing something or, having a consequence. At least you were gaining experience, which in the long run was more important. So anyway, food for thought. Anybody out there interested in playing D&D, AD&D 2nd edition, the Dark Sun Worlds, the bomb, the absolute bomb. That's as geek as I go, dudes. But it has been about 3.5, I don't know how many decades it's been now. I think the last time I played was like 1992, 93. How long is that? Wow, 33 years. Anyway, 32, 33. Is that? Yeah, 33 years. 33 years. Maybe 34. But yeah, no, I think it's about 34 years actually. At least. Yeah, that actually 15, 16, maybe 35 years. But anyway, I'm noticing like what you've given me a lot to sit and go, and now I need to go. I need to get my drum.
Yeah.
To get my drum out, like sit down with a drum. This is serious. I got to drum this up now. I got to drum this in.
It's interesting too. Like I also realized I made a connection with this diagram and the Saturn square you were showing you earlier, because I was thinking about the 2, 4, 6, 8 that formed in the corners and the 1, 3, 5, 9. And if you relate it back to the other diagram, if you go back to the like referenced here, if you go back to this one, so I represent, so the 2, 4, 6, and 8 can be represented in this Zerfax over here called the Uzerfax. And then the 1, 3, 7, and 9 represented here is the Phi Zerfax. And these are both basically Zerfaxes that sort of determine and what make reality mundane. I kind of like figured out what it does. So basically in Zerfaxology, the idea is that everything is perceived in Zerfaxes, right? So you look at your situation right now in whatever room you're in, whatever, what you see in front of you in your 3-dimensional vision, that becomes the bubble of your Zerfax. So the idea is in perception, there's 4 main Zerfaxes that we perceive them. The first one is the Kid Zerfax node, and all these nodes are represented here in the I Zerfax. So there's 4 basically, so the Kid Zerfax, and that's basically your 5 sensory experience, your body, what you see with your physical eyes and what you touch and taste. Basically, that's Zerfax. The second node is the Zith node, which is basically your imagination, your third eye, what you're sort of visualizing in your mind, what you're thinking about and intellectualizing. That's a whole Zerfax of experience. Then there's the O node, which is basically the feeling and the tone of what you're feeling. So if you're sad, this node will feel very dark and gloomy. If you're in a good mood, it'll be very bright and colorful. And then the fourth node, which is the Phi or Vith node, this is the node that's basically your connection to other people's consciousness and collective consciousness. So it's basically what connects your Zerfax to the Zarfax. So notice, so basically with all of that in mind, all 4 of those things are represented here in the Uzerfax. And what's noticed that while in mundane reality, all 4 of these circles are separate. They're not, there's a gap that's in between them. And because we feel the gap between our physical experience, our mind's eye, and etc., this is what makes it feel sort of imaginary and unreal. But these 4 nodes are expressed differently in the indeterminate zone. So this acts as sort of the meta Zerfax that sort of kind of dictates what goes on in all these Zerfaxes over here. Whereas on the indeterminate zone, it's more of a vertical alignment. So then the Vidzerfax channel is basically that. So instead of in the Uzerfax channel having all those 4 nodes I mentioned earlier being separate in the indeterminate zone, they're all compressed into a single Zerfax. So though that Kith, Zith, O, and Vith or Phi, they all kind of like are basically condensed here. So basically, see, this Zerfax is the Kid Zerfax. And this is basically kind of like your 5 sense, kind of like organic experience. And if you look at the Vid Zerfax very carefully, you notice that these like 4, purple points are actually 4 Kid Zerfaxes coming together to create one sort of flower or Vid Zerfax circle. And this is the meta Zerfax that dominates the indeterminate zone in the spiritual realm. And that's why you get a lot of people saying stuff like, everything is one, all consciousness is sort of one thing. It's because of the Vid Zerfax channel. and all of those nodes are kind of interconnected to each other. Whereas in mundane reality, there's this void that sort of separates. There's like this black void that kind of creates a space, a Zerfax space, that separates the two. And that's how reality becomes kind of crystallized and mundane, and why you can't just immediately like think that you can fly and just automatically fly. And it actually takes some level of effort and inertia to actually do so. And in order to overcome this, you have to basically use magic to override this so that it can manifest over here as well. And it's interesting because I realized this Zerfax called the Uzerfax is also the Zerfax of particles and atoms and molecules, and they're all kind of like manifested here. And Phi, this represents sort of the quantum potential. So this is basically kind of the quantum sort of super state. And the idea is that this, void, this black kind of covers these Zerfaxes in a kind of a black, sticky, tar goo, so that when your mind tries to affect it with your intention, it kind of like bounces off of it and does it. Because the idea is consciousness reflects into the adjacent Zerfax. So what happens here is reflected here and here and here and here. But the idea is it basically kind of insulates stuff, consciousness, and kind of solidifies it with a black void so that your mind can't intentionally, mess with the object. And that's how basically solid matter is essentially created and manifested into the universe. And this is kind of the quantum foam, which then goes into here. And then based on whatever is going on in this person's, it's really complicated, but I think I really was interested in the idea of the idea that there's no center to even numbers. And I think that's kind of interesting because this also kind of has like a potentiality where anything can manifest based upon, what person the person is thinking. Because the idea is this map represents one's individual experience. So the idea is, every time you fall asleep, this Zerfax, this Uzerfax switches to a different one every time you wake up and go to sleep, with different rules and different levels of randomness that you can associate, because there's also 4 different types of Uzerfaxes. But this is basically kind of how I understand how, the Zarfax interior basically crystallizes reality and creates it in that mundane fashion. And then over here in the indeterminate zone represents all the potential possibilities that can manifest here. And depending upon what you believe in will depend on what type of, Uzerfax you have here, which then affects this Zerfax and how things can manifest. So, for example, like the atheists I mentioned before, they'll have a very skeptical, high randomness Uzerfax, which will prevent things from manifesting in the indeterminate zone. Whereas people who are very high in belief and have a high conviction in their faith have a low percentage in their Uzerfax, and thus more things from the indeterminate zone can slip into their Zarfax interior. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up because I realized there's a correlation between that and the Saturn square you're mentioning earlier, this Zerfax over here basically representing the even numbers in the corner, and this representing the odd numbers that forms the cross in the center.
One thing you just said is that more things can slip in from the Uzerfax. Am I saying that?
Yeah, the Uzerfax.
The Uzerfax. That means that they're more likely to be able to get possessed?
I don't... maybe it's more that it's that reality might necessarily not go along with the rest of the Zarfax, right? The idea with this system is it's more like whatever you believe becomes real. So the idea with the Zarfax is there's basically an infinite number of these maps, and there's basically one map per individual. So basically this is like the map of basically sort of my Zarfax layout. But depending upon what you believe in, this map technically changes. So for example, if you're like an atheist I mentioned before, this indeterminate zone would just be a bunch of black, would just be this Zerfax right here. This whole section would just basically be X'd out, right? Because from the Ozerfikes, which is represented in the Nezerfax channel, the indeterminate zone doesn't affect their reality, and thus it doesn't manifest. And the idea is the more skeptical you are, the more of these layers get cut off. So if you're a little skeptical, this layer becomes a void, and then you have to overcome an additional Zerfax to. So, for example, let's say you're an agnostic, but you can't just believe in something, just on a regular, going to church or meditating or whatever, and you're at like a 400% randomness ratio, but because you're skeptical, you're at the 500% rate. But let's say you take a psychedelic and you have a really powerful psychedelic experience, that might bring things to the point where it overrides that 500%, and then this channel can essentially, manifest. And likewise, like this Zerfax up here basically represents your meta. So if you're a nihilist, for example, this Zerfax will be represented as Vlid, and there would be a Vlid that's put up here. So it depends. And if you're doing to different Zarfaxes, for example, this type of map change. So for example, if I were to do a map of the Fey realm, which is where the beings I channel the Fey from, there would actually be two Zaphras channels. So there's a Zaphras channel in the indeterminate zone, but there would also be a Zaphras channel in the Zarfax interior. And this, in the fluid Zarfaxes, would be an additional Vid Zerfax channel. So this chart is dynamic and changes depending upon certain situations and certain stuff. Likewise, if you're having a lucid dream, this Zerfax called the Vlid turns into a Biv Zerfax. So it's a different type of Zerfax. And depending upon what you're doing and stuff like that, this chart can change the dynamic. But this is basically the layout of kind of like what it is at like a default setting, essentially.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, brother. Lovely little adventure you've taken us all on. And I missed a little bit of it when I was just checking on my boy, but I had my phone with me. You might have noticed my phone popping in. The second Bush Whisperer just pops in, just like along for the ride. That's when I'm mobile with my handset. And then when I get to the other side of the house, the Wi-Fi can get a bit creaky in my boy's room, But yeah, that's very, very interesting. And I think there's like, I notice you've got a crescent here, hey? Ooh la la.
The Clizerfax, yeah. So
tell me about the Clizerfax.
So the Clizerfax is basically, this is the Zerfax one uses to get to the outer Zarfaxes, right? So I think I need to kind of present actually, you know what? I have a similar diagram to this. I'm going to exit this out and pull up something else.
You can just add another one.
Oh, I could just do that.
You don't have to exit this one.
Sorry.
You can just add another diagram and we can switch.
I'm going to do that right now. Let me just get that ready to go. So I actually don't know how to add additional images.
You just go to, did you put add picture or add screen?
I think it's because I still have something here. Actually, let me just stop screen. Okay, I figured it out now.
You know when you push present or invite, it gives you an option. Do you want to add an image file or do you want to share screen?
Yeah. Okay,
image files, you can add as many as you want.
Okay, so now I wanted to get the kind of the this chart because this has an additional table. So here on this side we have the key Zerfaxes, right? And then we also have the gate Zerfax correspondence. So this is the masculine and the feminine. So the idea is these are sort of the 4 levels of mystery. So Biv being the lowest and Zith being the highest. So a Biv Zerfax, for example, is essentially any kind of like story or like a narrative. So like if you read a book and then it becomes Theo, if you turn it into a religion, that's a different Zerfax. Then when you get to Jij, that's where you're able to, that the story expands beyond itself. Like it seems like it's opening itself up to a deeper space. Like think about like how H.P. Lovecraft had kind of his lore. But because of the way he wrote it, it seems like it was tapping into something beyond the story itself. So Jij is kind of like a story that goes beyond the intended writing of the author and seems to kind of like open itself up into some sort of deeper extra dimensional space. But with Jij, there's no sense of where it's leading to. It's just kind of like, here's some mystery random thing. Whereas Cle, this is basically kind of like a, you think about like the idea of superpositioning, where you have like two particles that are separate, but still when one acts, the other acts. So the idea is when you're in this part of the dream realm, which is the third part of the indeterminate zone, the Clizerfax is essentially you're taking basically a Biv Surfax from our world and you're trying to match it up with a story from a different Zarfax, right? So let's say we're working with the Zarfax Ezethia, which is where my Fae spirits come from. So the idea is I'll take a Zerfax from my world and sort of try to match it up with a Zerfax from their world. So for example, let's say I'm out in the forest, right? And I'm in the indeterminate, I'm in an astral projection state. I project myself into a forest. So I'm in this green, forest, and this Zerfax is changed into Biv over here because I'm lucid. So when you're lucid, this becomes Biv, but when you're not lucid, it's Vlid, right? And the idea is if I take that, but try to, and that would be like, a forest that I'm thinking of. Maybe I'm thinking of like Lord of the Rings, for example. So the idea is you kind of take yourself into the imagination and you go through different doors to go into deeper levels of the imagination, right? So the idea is I would take a forest, but then I would try to make it so it matches the colors of Ezethia. So in Ezethia, instead of a place where, in our world where the trees and the grass are green, the sky is blue. In that world, the trees and grass are purple and the sky is yellow. So if I take a forest from my world and change it to the colors of that Zarfax, I can use that as a bridge to enter the different Zarfax that I'm going to sort of mentally project my mind to. Because the idea is you feel the influence and the consciousness of the Zarfax sort of enveloping your current Zerfax. You don't necessarily have to astral project and leave your body to go to a different Zarfax. You can do that. That is a potential possibility, but you don't necessarily have to if you can recognize the nodes I was talking about. So you may in your first node will be in physical reality, but your second node, which is your third eye, and your third node, which is sort of your emotional body, those are then in a different Zarfax, and you can feel that Zarfax sort of existing outside of the periphery of your world, and you can get influence in that. And that intersection between our world and the different Zarfax, that's what the Clizerfax represents, is because what you're essentially doing with this is you're taking our indeterminate zone and matching it with the indeterminate zone of another Zarfax, like stacking two sets of Lego sets together. And now our indeterminate zone then becomes connected to the indeterminate zone of a different Zarfax, thus opening your dream world to a different dream world, and thus allowing different interdimensional entities to possibly come and do manifesting intent into the Zarfax interior, which is basically kind of how this magical system essentially works. Like Clizerfax magic is essentially like a big part in terms of, contacting these entities and sort of bringing them into our world, because, there's a big thing. And then Zith is sort of the highest level key Zarfax. And this basically represents the Zarfax nucleus. And the idea is like, Zith is such a vast mystery. It's like completely incomprehensible. It's kind of like the whole idea of the Tao, like, anyone who can speak of the eternal Tao is not the eternal Tao. You got to think of Zith in kind of that same way. If you it's like as a mystery that's always sort of beyond your comprehension, and it's kind of like this placeholder that kind of keeps you going further and further. So that's, I would say, essentially what this this crescent moon essentially represents, known as Cle.
That's very interesting, because I'm seeing what you're saying here, and it makes me think about the clit. You know what I think about when I say that word? Are you with me, Cosmic?
Well, yeah,
You
yeah, I'm
follow?
with you.
It makes me think of the clitoris.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean,
Like,
I've thought of that too. Of course,
makes me think the word. I think like, hey, dude, that word makes me think of clitoris. And big love, Vince. How are you? Shalom. Big love. Hope you're good. Yeah, Vince, missed you, man. I was hoping that you would message me that there was somewhere to talk to me. Um, I'm at Bush Whisperer in Telegram, man. Just be lovely to touch base. Yeah, it makes me think about the clitoris because it's the Cataic cup, right? It's the crescent. The crescent is the cup. And I mean, if you look at a clitoris, right? Like, okay, like if you really get down, you're gonna study the art of the Cataic potential, right? The Cataic instrument in its full glory. It's like a crescent, right? It's like a reverse crescent, right? That opens up. And in the top of this little crescent, there's like a little crescent inside the crescent, which is a clitoris, right? And you just got to like marvel at the perfection of the infrastructure. Like God really outdid themselves, didn't they? Like, you know, and I don't ask me why I speak about God in the plural, but that's just how it rolls. And because like, how can God just be one? God's got to be everything, everywhere, everyone. But so you've got this crescent within a crescent, and if you go deep in down this joy canal, if you travel deep down through the joy canal, how's that for such a cool name for a vagina? Hey, the joy canal. Doesn't that just make so much sense?
It's like another take on Joy Division, right?
yeah. But like it's perfect, joy canal. And you get right into there's yet another cup. It's like a crescent, like a capture, like a lake, like a crescent, where your seed would rest, right, upon an egg cell, which is like right in there. If you look at what it looks like, so inside it's a crescent. The journey takes you to a crescent. The clitoris is a little crescent hanging within a crescent that enters into this journey into the center, into a crescent. It's like it's a triple moon, man. Which is just really, really interesting. And you say to me that is the translation point. Remember we were talking about mirrors earlier, Cosmic?
Yeah.
Mirroring. That's like the mirroring agent, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a different aspect of the mirroring. So it's like there's sort of like, in a way, it's like there's a mirroring that happens here and here, but there's also a mirroring that happens with this and the outer Zarfexes out there coming into here. And I have another diagram in the queue because I wanted to show this. This is a more intuitive way to understand how to like intuit these channels. So imagine this ball represents your field of vision, and wherever you can go, you can move in 3 directions. And the edges of the ball represent the edges of your peripheral vision. So the idea is with each channel, you'll feel these energies outside of your field of vision. So like I noticed with the actually this should be the Kids Are Facts channel. I realized I made a mistake on this diagram here. This should be, but the Riz Are Facts is what basically works with that. But the idea is, so when you're in the Kids Are Facts state, that's usually when you're using cannabis, right? And one thing I noticed with when you're on a high dose of cannabis is that the certain edges and objects will seem brighter and more pronounced than usual. Like there's like a higher level of visual acuity and everything kind of has a shine to it. And I noticed that shine is emblematic of this this white void in the Rizerfax channel. So the idea is with this meditation is you're learning to perceive the colors that exist outside the edges of your Zerfaxes, right? So when you're operating with magic, let's say, so for example, in this diagram, the color is green. So if you're working with like Venus, for example, you would feel this outer green atmosphere surrounding your Zerfax. But if you're working with outer Zarfaxes, this also tends to affect. So, for example, if I'm working with the phase Zarfax of Ezethia, where the entities I work channel from, this Zerfax will have a yellow color that surrounds my entity. So it's almost like my Zerfax is temporarily within their Zarfax. And the idea is, there's like different surroundings that happen to it. It's almost like it's like if you take like a room out of a video game or a single room out of a building and you just kind of put it in some empty space that doesn't really logically make sense. It's kind of like that. But anyway, I think that's it, because I know like the channels when I describe that, but I feel like this is kind of a more like intuitive way to kind of understand the concept that I'm talking about and how to kind of differentiate between the states. And likewise, if you take psychedelics and you feel that interconnectedness, this is kind of how I perceive myself when I'm in the Vizerfax channel. So I don't know. I just felt like that would kind of like makes it a little bit more intuitive and easier to understand than just looking at the symbols, having it like presented like that.
Yeah, man. That's interesting. Like the pear. Remember I was talking about pear-shaped early?
Yeah, I remember
pear-shaped periphery. It's like a referee. It's a referee of the pear referee, right? And in the pairing, this is very interesting because the number 2 is the potential. Sorry, I'm getting lost in the chat here. Maybe even sorry, people, please forgive me. This is important. Yeah, basically this periphery, like when you're looking at the number 2, right? Holding that like the potential, and the potential that is being driven by the number 8, which is driving it through into the cosmic manifestation, right? That potential then represents a pair, right? 2, which is interesting. And the crescent represents the number 2, which is a pair, right? 2 1s is usually the manifestational element of 2, and 2 is the conceptual, energetic, internal process of it. And then we've got the what was the word we were talking about? Periphery. So the referee that is holding this reflection between these 2 points is the periphery. Isn't that interesting how the words sort of suggest this?
I even thought about it like that, like periphery and like that really etymological context there.
Because in your system, that guy, right? That guy, that guy, Cliff. Sorry, Cliff is Cliff. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Claire represents that coming together that manages the one reflection and the other reflection to put them together, right?
Yeah, there's definitely a kind of a coming together And see, the idea is like the highest. There's 7 Zurfixes, right? And those are kind of what the belief systems are manifested. And the Klizerfix is different because it doesn't. See, the idea is every Kli has a sort of it's a pair. It is you're absolutely right about that. It functions as a pair because it's like there's one part of the Klizerfax exists in this Zarfax, and then one Klizerfax exists in another Zarfax. So it's a Zerfax that exists in 2 Zarfaxes simultaneously. So there's definitely that pair. And the Klizerfix is essentially a broken pair. So it's only one half of it, and the other half is as a void that's essentially taking its place. And that essentially is how they explain where the deceptive Zerfixes essentially come from. That sort of like that cut off, because the thing about a solid Zarfax is that it's surrounded by a black xiphoid membrane, which sort of like insulates the effect of outer Zarfaxes from sort of penetrating it. So we're kind of like insulated in this black ball, but there's a little bit of stuff that sort of is able to kind of get through. But the thing is, if you have a Zerfix, this Kle symbol gets downgraded to Biv. And because the idea is the less encumbered you are by the Zerfixes, the higher key Zerfax that's manifested here. So if you're only at a level 1 Zerfix, which basically infects. So the idea is with a Zerfix, it basically, the higher you're into it, the more of this chart that it basically swallows up. So basically, for example, if you're a level 1 atheist materialist, this whole column right here is essentially blank. If you're level 2, then this column is blank. If you're level 3, and then if you're level 4, this entire section is essentially blank. So, and that there's a different effect there. And the idea is that if it's only one that's encumbered, then it's jizz, because you're acknowledging that there's something beyond you, but you're still kind of caught up in your belief system. And then once you kind of like completely let it go and open yourself up to the mystery, it's like only then can you truly recognize the existence of Kle by sort of acknowledging its connection to Zith. And when you say Zith, you got to really emphasize like the buzz, like the Zith, which is where this one is more like a soft Zith. There's like a Zith. It's almost like soft sounding. This is like a hard, like you want to say when you're pronouncing this, you want to almost like feel like your tongue is being electrocuted when you're saying a Zith, And it's like it basically kind of acknowledges the highest levels of incomprehensible mystery. And this is sort of like the next level, sort of beneath that kind of connects that. And that's like, that this represents basically an infinity beyond infinity. I can just kind of go on and on about this stuff. Yeah.
Well, dear brother, it's been an absolutely lovely discussion. I don't know if Indy's around. Maybe Indy fell asleep. I hope Indy fell asleep.
I bet he did.
Yeah, the last time like Indy wasn't here, but he was here. He was like taking off. So let's just keep a prayer in our heart that everything's good. There you are, dear brother. How are you?
Doing well. I've been listening in. It's all fascinating. Awesome.
Well, we're getting to the end of the show. I thought to give you guys a chance to throw your last weapons at the table. Put your last ideas on the
I think I said everything I need to say. Indy, you got anything else?
I think I got everything I need to say in as well.
Well, dear brothers, it's been an honor. I hope everybody in the chat enjoyed. I hope you got what you came for. Hope you found it fun. Om Namah Shivaya, big love, Vince, big blessings. And yeah, man. Big love to everybody in the chat. I hope you guys enjoyed the show, enjoyed the discussion. Was it a show? It's not so much of a show. It's more of a conversation. I don't know. It's a show and tell conversation. I'll show you mine if you show me yours. We've seen the clit revealed. So once we've seen the clitoris, we're ready for action. Sorry, guys. I'm got to give my head, like, I'm seeing my girlfriend tomorrow. So I've got to like pull my head straight, you know. But sending you all big love and blessings. Hope you guys are having an amazing weekend and a great day. And yeah, it's been a fun conversation. It's been an honor as always. I'm glad you're still with us, Indy brother. I was a bit worried about you. Like mentioned a few times, Indy wasn't there, but I figured maybe you were busy doing something because you often are. As long as you're still at home and everything's good, everything's fine. And Om Namah Shiva to everybody. It's been an honor to have you guys here in the chat. It's been an honor to be here with Indy and with Cosmic. And till next week, looking forward to it. For those of you out there, if you didn't see the video I did on sorcery, go and take a look at it. Go and check it out. I think it's pretty cool. And the live stream on Friday is, I'd say, as priceless as some of the content that was shared earlier in this live stream by myself. But here we've got a nice chunk of Cosmic's display of his dynamic system, which I think is really lovely. We're going to have to get Cosmic to get his YouTube channel on the go so that he can start putting that out there. It's time, Cosmic. It's time. It's time. So sending you all big love, big blessings, peace, honor, respect. Keep the smile alive. Have a spectacular weekend. Don't forget to smile. Keep the smile alive because the smile will keep you alive. With that, it's a wrap. Om Shanti.